early in the year, certainly early in the fall, talking about things, looking more closely as we get closer to these dates. But today we're going to go through the budgets. Ruben has a presentation for us that he's going to show us. We're going to talk about our budget for the coming year, what the district feels it needs. The board is going to try and take it all in and ask all the questions that we can so that we're as well prepared as possible. And so that's it. It looks like we're all here except for Nathan, and hopefully we informed him, having just brought him on the report, but we'll get going. This is kind of one of the most critical parts of what we do, right? Looking at what our needs are, trying to think about our taxpayers and how we balance the needs of the school, the needs of the community, the needs of our children. And so we're in to dive in. And thank you to all the administrators and our business manager, facilities director for being here to work through this with us. Ruben?
Great. Excellent. Thank you all for being here, and for the school board and anyone else who is here. I printed off these slides in very small slides, but for the purpose of taking notes, I wanted to ask questions on there, kind of so you don't forget. Everyone here to my right is able to answer questions regarding most of these budget areas, certainly. Some individuals, as we go through this, I won't be the only one presenting. I'll ask some of these administrators over here to be able to give you more information so that you're hearing from them, number one, and having different voices, but also getting a greater level of detail. So this presentation here, every one of them that we do every year is a little bit different, but this year, we felt that we needed to celebrate some things that we've done really well and to inform the community how we do go about budgeting, but also what a public school is required to budget for. And so those who are in the public here with us today, and certainly when we have this out on video and other sessions that we have, because this is really just the beginning. We are not going to be finalized today. We will talk Monday. If we feel that that's not enough time, we have another board meeting. We've started this a little earlier than we had normally done so that we can get the feedback that we need and we have time to change. Plus, there are other elements at the end of this presentation here that we're going to have to consider that impact taxes, but really isn't part of this budget right here. So, we'll start off, and the presentation is, everyone has a copy of the presentation, but also it's on the whiteboard ahead if you want to see that. We'll start off with just a general theme for budgeting. And our general theme is future focused and sustainable. School budgets continuously go up because of the nature of what we have to budget. But how the rate at which they go up is what we have to be future focused and sustainable with as we go forward and make it, well, just carry on with our practices and do our research and projections. We'll talk about examples through the years of the last 8 to 9 years of examples of sustainable financial practices that we've had that are still ongoing. All of these link to this budget right here. And then what are our next steps? When we talk about next steps, that means the budget. What are we thinking about? Now we understand that this budget proposal right here is saying this is what we believe is needed for our kids. It is not the Cadillac, but it is definitely a really, a vehicle that would help us to maintain and continue to progress forward. And then budget implications. Certainly that, you know, we talk about tax rates and what that means for Ringe, what that means for Jaffrey, what does default mean, what does the draft proposed mean? And then other considerations that we have to keep in mind when we start talking about the budget, what we want to reduce, what are our values, what needs to be cut out of this, and so forth. Future focused and sustainable. So you've seen that arrow before. It's in some of our documents that the board has approved. It is from Senge, Peter Senge, who is a systems guru, systems thinker, not just for education, but for organizations in general. And it's the idea of, as we go forward with our strategic design, with our strategic direction, we want to make sure that all parts of the organization, and that includes elements of the communities as well, are all moving in that direction. Now, those colors and those shapes, all of those arrows inside that big arrow represent you know, just any part of the system. And some have small pieces to play, some have larger pieces to play, but they're all important. Everything impacts one another. If we had arrows going in opposite directions, if we had ideas and movement going in various directions, or helping stall us, it would be a problem. It would be inefficient. It would not be sustainable. Sustainability happens when we're all moving forward. So what does this mean? Budgeting needs to be aligned with the strategic direction. It needs to be systems-based. So when we think and do anything here, we look at how one element of the organization impacts another element of the organization. We do nothing in isolation. We also understand that we have, as a public school, a commitment to the community, both for their taxes, but also we have a commitment to some of the social and future well-being and economic growth of a community as well. And it's well known that the success, the health of a public school system within a community, especially smaller communities, can be very helpful for the future sustainability and economic development of a community, should the community choose to utilize the school for that purpose. Budgeting needs to support and initiate helpful change and innovation. We are here to educate our children. We are in a different age of education than we were in the 1980s, the 1990s, the early 2000s. Things are rapidly changing all the time, and we have to predict what types of learning our kids need to have in order to be successful for their future, and to have jobs that many of which don't even exist right now. And so we know that as we teach the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic, which is all very important to continue to do, we also need to make sure that those C's of collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity are also very much in place within all of what we do. And then we need to decrease the rate of future spending increases. So it is very difficult for a school system, you don't see them anywhere doing this, going backwards. We did for years at state level for a couple of years there. We were able to do that by looking at trends and being able to budget in a slightly different way. We certainly, we had COVID, that changed a lot of the patterns. We are still, and going to be for years, dealing with the aftermath of that from a social standpoint, from a social, emotional, behavioral standpoint with our learners and adults within the community as well. A lot of people, you know, it was difficult. It was a difficult time for a lot of people. Certainly economically, we just had a couple of the most intense years of inflation. One of those years we had to work in a very difficult budget year during the highest rate of inflation, and we were able to squeak that one out, and then you know, we have this year right now. And then why budget this way? This allows the school district the support needed to accomplish its goals, and we understand that anything worth achieving takes time. And we've been at this for 9 years. Everything from curriculum to school improvement to even just budgeting and making sure that we're moving forward in the direction that we want to. We want to ensure future learners and their families receive the learning and support they need, and that we can continuously improve. The next few slides give us a little history. Not everyone here was part of the school board or has come to these meetings over this many years. In 2015-16, I came on board and I had the opportunity to be on the negotiating team for the teacher contract. Now, there had been some history where contracts have not been passed, and there have been some one-year, single-year contracts put through. That is not a recipe for sustainability. This school district had the lowest starting salaries in the entire region, and it wasn't close. And so we had a lot of goals we needed to achieve in order to attract individuals and maintain our staffing levels so that we had consistency and improvement as we go through over the years. Now, during this time frame, we were able to raise the base wages because we invested. Where did we get that investment? We got it from a very long negotiation process that resulted in us being able to change from our HMO plan, which is a very high, expensive plan, to still an expensive plan, but not as expensive, to a consumer-driven model, which is, of course, a big shift if anyone has never done that in practice. So if you look at 2015-16, our premium increases, which were actually below the average that year, was 16.4%. These are very similar to what school districts all around our area are feeling right now. Some in the area have 19%, others 20, 25% increases. That can result in 500,000, depending on the size of the district, to upwards of $1 million or more in increases in their budget in 1 year, just to maintain the health care that they have. Now, we were able to not only switch the programming, we were also able to maintain the percentages. Now, when I talk to the school care, so many people have gone to the consumer-driven in school care. Most of their clientele have at this point in time, 80% they said. But most of those individuals did a very different implementation process. They decided to change the way that it's funded. So it was mostly either 100% or 95% school district funded. That's not giving the sustainability that it needs for all involved. So, over these last 8 years, if we assumed that if we had not done that, let's just assume a modest rate of 7.5% increase averaging year after year, we would be starting our conversation today $1 million higher. That's conservative. All these estimates that I have here and over these next slides are conservative estimates. We would definitely be starting in a different place than we are now. It took thinking 9 years ago to make sure that we weren't there today. 2018, yes.
Since I'm a little new to this,
Sure.
what is our model as far as contributions?
It's
You indicated other districts do 90 or 95. What do we do?
85-15 or 80-20, depending on your classification.
Thank you.
And if you're a long-term substitute, there is another classification. It's 73, I think it is, percent, and then 20 and 27. But 85-15 is the, depending on the plan you take. Yeah.
Regardless of whether...
It's a great question.
Regardless of whether you're a single or a family plan, does that make...
It does make a difference. There's two things that we will need to do, and I apologize, I didn't communicate this. If you could, because we're having, taking notes in minutes, if you could mention your name and your town of residence, you'll have to do it once, because...
Town of Ringe,
Yeah,
appointed by the selectmen to be here.
yeah, and your name?
Tom Conies.
Tom Williams, okay, great, thank you. So I'll direct that to Carrie, because I actually don't have that right in front of me. The difference, I know it's on our website.
Yeah, the majority of staff fall under, for two-person or family, it's an 80-20, and for single, it's 85-15. So that's the majority of the staff. It does depend on where you're at, some might be a little bit
So
different.
pretty
but-
similar, single family.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. So 2018 to current. This was one of our more controversial timeframes, but we've actually just buttoned up another significant part of this process that's taken about 5 or so years, is combining the middle and high school communities. This has resulted in more effective and efficient operations across the board, more efficient and effective use of employees. We have certainly can provide stories about that and why that happens. Greater capacity for change and innovation. We have seen examples of that. This school had to do that super fast the last time we had a default budget. They saved the system basically by making some very significant changes, and that was the entire school, that was their entire staff's decision to do so, which was a reduction. They have actually, over these years, not increased their staffing numbers. They have changed the type of staffing that's happened, but we've been able to do it in a way that has not increased FTEs. We actually have fewer FTEs now, and fewer administrators in general. Greater capacity for change and innovation, strengthening of the community, better staffing patterns, more opportunities, and belonging for learners. And we see that a lot when we talk about the co-curriculars, extracurriculars. Examples of future focused. 2022 to current. We had the COVID experience here, as everyone did, and we were provided funds from the federal government, as many schools were. And we chose to use our ESSER funds as much as we possibly could in ways that were going to improve the entire community. And what I mean by that is our entire school community, our kids, of course, because that's our charge, and the community that is Jaffrey and Ringe. And universal access to pre-K, these funds allowed us 2 years of, and this is the second year of that, of being able to continue a movement that we were already in the process of moving toward, and pay for our 4-year-olds to have full-day 4-year-old pre-K. And it's a model that we have other schools who want to visit us. Seabrook is going to be coming over this month, or this next week, I believe, or the following week. Conval around here also has gone this avenue, but there are very few places in the entire state of New Hampshire that have the robust system that we have, and it's something to be very proud of. It's also very important because there is a financial benefit. We're going to talk about the educational benefits, but the financial benefit to a community. That financial benefit does not usually show itself right away. It shows itself 15 or so years down the road. There's a lot of research on this. You can Google the research on early childhood quality, early childhood learning, and actually the investment that it is and how much more it pays off in the long run. You get much stronger communities, people who have better jobs, people who buy homes, they're contributing to the tax load, and so we're thinking about the future of Jaffrey and Ringe and the long-range future, and we need to do that. Otherwise, someone's going to be continuously paying higher taxes, and it's going to be the same model of everyone having, a few people owning homes, doing all the funding of schools. We need to have planning for the future, and so our school is trying to do this. Yes?
So Ruben, I know that's it's an important point, the benefit of early childhood education. Can you explain just a little bit more the point you were just making, how this helps our children going forward and how it also...
I'm going to have Nikki speak about how it helps our children, because I think that she has some data that she can share and some pictures, and that would be good to do, and we'll do that in just a second. But as for the community, if we look at the bottom part of this, and this comes from a study of multiple studies, 2019, Linda Darling Hammond and M. Gardner. Basically, the studies that were out there, the majority of them show that there's obviously higher math and literacy achievement, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Lower special education identification, that's important for the kids. That's also a financial important benefit for the community, because the community pays for special education. And as we go through this presentation, you're going to see what this community pays for special education. By law, that it is something that we do have to pay, and it is a high expense. Slower increase in special education costs. So again, you're not going to stop special education costs, but we can slow the increase of the special education costs. And in some cases, you can reverse some things. We'll talk about that as well. Lower arrest, conviction, and incarceration rates. And on the flip side of that, you have individuals who are getting jobs with higher wages later in life and are more likely to own a home and pay taxes. That's what you're looking to educate, so that people come back. It doesn't matter if they're going to college or whether they're in the trades. That doesn't matter. You can make a great living either way, as long as you have the thinking skills, the creativity, the communication, the critical thinking that you need. I'm out of order, but let's talk about pre-K right now. I was going to do it later on, but I think it would be good since the question was asked.
Sure. Can I just scooch my chair forward rather than
Yes,
stand?
you can
Is
stand,
that right? I don't wanna
whatever
sit
you'd like
for
to
now.
do.
So, we, at the beginning of the school year, we made a shift at the elementary level to start using AimsWeb Plus, which is a benchmark assessment system that allows us to look more closely in much more detail at our literacy and numeracy skills with our students. It's already being used to some extent at the middle school, and the reason why we made the shift at the elementary level is really to make sure that we were meeting the change requirements from the DOE around dyslexia screening. So it was sort of a quick change from the state in the summer, and we jumped on board with this tool, and I think the feeling consistently in both of the elementary schools is it's been a win-win for us with regards to having very specific, very clear data that not only helps us to understand the impact of our programming, like in this case, but also think about how do we adjust and respond to students who are right in front of us with regards to instruction right in the moment. So, so it's really been beneficial even in just this short time. So what happened in the fall? All students K through 5 completed universal assessments, which means universal means everyone, in both literacy and numeracy. This data shows the composite scores. So composite means that there are many subtests, particularly in the early literacy batch of assessments for kindergartners, and it takes many of those results and puts them together as like one composite, one whole score for a student. So this data shows the composite scores for early literacy for our kindergarten students from both schools combined together. So if you look at the scores for a moment, so the blue bars show the total number of learners in kindergarten between both schools. And then it's broken down because you're kind of far away. It starts over on the very far left-hand side with students that scored at the well below average, so the 0 to 10th percentile with their composite score. The next section is the 11th to 24th percentile is our below average. Average is 25th to 75th percentile, above average, well above. So then how we've broken it down is by looking at the total number of students is in blue. Students that did not attend SAU 47 preschool programming is the red bar. Students that did are the green bar. So this was really exciting for us to see, because you can see of the 15 students that are currently well below where we would want them to be with their early literacy skills, 6 of them were in our preschool program, 9 of them were not. So there's evidence there, both there and in the next column, to show that our preschool program is having a significant effect. So then as you move along, you can see this is kind of where we want people to be from here over. And so this is where we see that shift, right? We're seeing students that were in our preschool are significantly more well prepared for kindergarten, shown by these assessments. Something to note about these 2 columns here, or these 2 columns, is that they also include some of our learners who are receiving supports and services through IEP services. So I'm not suggesting by any means that, so therefore we'd expect to see them, but it is not shocking or unlikely to see our students who receive special ed supports and services, particularly as they're first starting in kindergarten, in here. We also have multiple students who are receiving special ed supports and services who are in the green columns, particularly here, from both schools too. So the impact of our preschool, universal preschool program is really having a significant impact on our early literacy skills. It was kind of interesting to see the data from both JGS and RMS, which I think is again another opportunity for us to learn. So we'll go on a tangent for a moment. The early literacy skills at RMS were students coming out of our preschool program. Students did really, really well. In fact, I'm like looking at the score right here and you can't see it, which is good because it has student names. But it's listed from the student who had the lowest percentile to the highest. The first 10 out of the first 15 students were students that did not attend our preschool.
And you're saying that first end means the lowest?
The lowest, right? So, and 5 of them are in the red number 9, and 5 of them are in the red number 10. And the other 5 of the RMS kids that didn't attend are in here too. So that's pretty, and then the flip is true for JGS with their math data, which is then a great opportunity. So clearly something is happening preschool math related that is a strength at JGS, and something preschool literacy is happening really great at RMS. So our preschool teams can now come together and share the brilliant things that are happening in both places so all students can benefit from that. So it's also like another sidebar of why the data is really good. So this is, our literacy scores. Clearly our preschool is having, our numeracy scores, and again, our preschool is having a great impact again. So, students who were in preschool, our green bar, with the exception right here, is always lower than our students that did not participate in preschool. And then from here over where we want them to be, the impact is great, showing that they are having great success. And again, the green bars here also represent students that are receiving supports and services through IEPs, not just in the below average and well below average support. So pretty significant data. Last year was the first year that we had 2 full classes of preschool, plus the half-day program with some kindergarten age-appropriate students. But even just in the first year, it's clearly having a significant impact. And then not reflected here, I know that kindergarten teachers in both schools, that sort of like anecdotal, not hard numbers data, even from when school started in the end of August, the feeling pretty consistently between kindergarten teachers were, whoa, these students are ready for kindergarten. They are ready to be in school, even if it's just from a place of, I know how to move around the building, I know how to transition, I know how to line up, I know how to share toys with a friend, I know how to solve a problem, I know how to go to the bathroom by myself, I know how to do so many things that are so important that have to be in place before we can get to really the instruction of kindergarten. And students really came into our kindergarten classrooms this year ready for school, ready to be learners, which was really exciting.
I had a question. It's obvious probably, but just to be clear, like for those, that bucket of students that we talk about attended, preschool, you're including both the half-day and the full day.
We're talking about anybody who is age appropriate that moved into kindergarten, so it's the half-day as well as the full-day students. Most students came out of the full-day program,
Yeah,
but there is a handful of students that moved from the half-day program into kindergarten, yeah. Great question.
Any differences there? Do you look at, I mean, it's small, I guess, you're seeing an improvement, but do you see like a significant difference between the students that did the full day and the half day, or just, I don't even know if
I
you
didn't
look
look,
at it that way.
I
yeah.
didn't look
Just
that
curious, yeah.
closely at it, I could,
Yeah.
for sure, but I didn't look that closely, so I.
Yeah, I just think
wouldn't
if we're
wanna
making
speak to it right
decisions going forward, right, and maybe understanding some of that might be helpful.
now. Yeah.
Could I just share that generally, as we've set it up right now, generally, the half-day programs are 3-year-olds, and generally, our 4-day programs are 4-year-olds. So in the past, when, full day, sorry, in the past, our half-day programs being all we had were mixed groups. So now, more often than not, the half-day programs are 3, and the full days are those 4. So more of our, if not most, are in that full day. But it is interesting information to gather.
So like, for example, at RMS last year, and I can speak to those numbers better than JGS, we had 28 students go out of the full day program into kindergarten. And I think we had 7 students come out of the half day program go into, so it's a
Yeah.
a quarter of the number of
It's all really,
students.
to me, it's all convincing the way you presented it. I was just curious about
Yeah.
like, what about the kids that were going for 2 years? Did they like really, it's just interesting stuff to look at. But overall, I think,
Yeah, we
you know,
can look at that.
when we're talking about these decisions, it's helpful to just understand how effective this is. I think you've
Yeah,
obviously done a good job here. And to me, it's just common sense anyways, but, to have the data that's gonna back it up when we make these decisions is certainly helpful.
I think it's logical to have early learning, if you will. But your data is only relationship to the school system. You haven't compared it to early learning outside of the school system. So I would expect your data to show benefit, but without independent analysis of other, I'll use the term broadly, preschool, pre-K, learning, which is available and does happen. There's no real comparison to, a 3 or 4-year-old that goes to another program outside the school system. And so your data basically is skewed towards the school system because it has no outside comparison to say this is good or this is bad or we're doing better than something else.
and we can look at that.
That's my observation.
Again, I don't know the story of learners coming in from JGS as well as I do from RMS. Most of the learners that have not attended our preschool at RMS typically come in from being either at home or in a daycare situation. Typically it's at home and not in any kind of formalized preschool program. We did have, I believe, 4 learners join us from Head Start this year, but typically in Ringe, our students who are joining the school for the first time as kindergartners are typically coming from in-home settings or staying at home with their family members in Ringe, but I don't know what that looks like in
It's
January.
relatively split between Head Start and home.
Okay,
Point of order, so to speak.
yeah,
I imagine it's difficulty, we're talking about standardized test data, administered by the state, I assume, right, for the schools, and then for homeschools and other preschools, they just probably don't do that, and there's no data, or I guess it would be much more difficult to get. It's sparse, I'm sure, there's research and things like that, but to go. For data, it would need to be like apples to apples comparison, right? They need to be doing the same tests in order to be for a valid comparison, I assume, and so.
and so.
Therein lies the difficulty.
Yeah, well,
That's a good point.
And I would say, I would argue that there's not a whole lot of difficulty here because this is based upon decades of research that are out there. We follow the best practices of what the research indicated we would have for results.
Yeah.
That would give us better results than those programs that they have been able to get data from, such as Head Start or other types of programs. The language that is used is a high-quality early childhood learning experiences. That's very different than simply a daycare situation.
And I didn't speak to that, maybe I should as well, just to point out that the data here is what is called norm reference data, which means that it is student scores are compared to national norms. And so where they perform and where they score is then compared to, so when I said the like the first to 9th percentile, that is compared to national norms that have been developed by AimsWeb over many, many years. They do update their norms tables pretty regularly, every couple of years, depending on the shifts that they're seeing in their national data. But so this is showing how our learners are performing compared to national norms. So just to kind of think about that, which is really exciting because, you know, I think we'd have to go back and look at it, but you know, our numbers of learners that are at the average or above average is significantly higher than our number of learners that is not. So that's really exciting. We hope to see that continue. We'll assess again in the winter and then again in the spring. So we hope to see these well below and below average columns get really, really small. It'd be great if we could get them to disappear, but definitely those blue columns are going to reduce and move students along. And again, move students further up. I continue.
So the interesting thing about this data for me is that there are other preschools in the area, and when my kids were younger, there was that desperate search, you know, that all parents had. What's a good daycare, preschool? And so some of them still exist. There's Harrisville, there's Dublin, there's Head Start, obviously, which is a fantastic program, and there's a couple private ones. So it's interesting to me to see that there are still, I'm sure, some kids going to those, especially the ones that offer the daycare as well as the preschool, but that even those kids who are in a preschool setting are not showing the same benefits as if they attended ours. Because I'm sure there's a handful that are still going to Harrisville or Dublin Community Preschool, for instance, and they're still not as prepared as the kids who are going to our preschool, and that is significant to me. So it's not just comparing the kids who had no preschool or formal preschool to kids who had a formal preschool. It's very, you know, when you think about it, you can compare what kids are getting at other preschools to our preschool, and that difference is significant. And, you know, kudos to all those fantastic teachers who are getting our little kids ready for kindergarten. Kindergarten hits kids pretty hard. So this is fantastic data, and again, kudos to those fantastic teachers.
A couple of points, the research on kindergarten is if you end kindergarten months behind other learners, that becomes years later on down the road. And so that's, we certainly want to make sure that as many are on target as possible in kindergarten. And that, I think the most important thing that I would, well, there's a lot of important things, so maybe not the most important thing, but I think a very important item that Nikki talked about is the learning community that we have through collaboration, where she said in Ringe we saw this really high level of literacy. In Jaffrey we saw this really high level of numeracy. Now we can get together and we can look at our data, which is, you can't do if you don't have kids, right? But also we have an advantage that a lot of other places don't have. We do have this community with a large group of individuals and teachers. We can get together, look at that data and say, all right, how do we change our practice? So, because this is decent, this is good, it can be better. And so, and then that has a ripple effect, again, this has sustainability for other grade levels down the road.
thank you for getting off on this. This is just one piece of a broader fabric of,
Will save us time later on in the presentation, so. we-
yeah, and, you know,
I
I mean,
would
it
just
just
ask,
Yeah.
shows how
Oh,
we're
okay.
trying to look at the education of our children, but at the same time, doing it in a way that the data shows is good for the economy of the community.
Well, and so, and just that we've had, this actually is something that you would see in a lot of communities. We started a nonprofit over in Keene years ago with, that's still going on, it's doing some great work, but after 1 year of data collection, what we found was that families who had gone into our, this program, where kids were able to go to after-school programs and we were able to get them involved in activities and things like that that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford. Their parent, yes, it benefited the kids, it benefited those families. They were able to add significant income to their household. And we are finding also, we know stories, I'm not gonna share the personal stories that we've had given to us. Some are sad stories and some are, they're all joyful in the sense that we've been able to support families in need so that they can work. And that's important for the now of the financial element of our community.
And Mr. Cohen?
well, I guess I would ask, in your chart that you had up there, how, have you identified students that have gone to other preschool environments, Christine?
Yeah, but you can, I mean, I could
mean,
do
you
it very
could-
quickly with
Out
the
of
data
all
that I have in
those,
front of
you
me
know, your
for,
bars and stuff, the ones
yeah, for Ridge.
that
but-
did not attend your program,
Yep,
how many went to another program?
yeah, we could pull that and get it to the
But
school.
you can
board.
identify
Families are
that
really
and chart it
information.
independently. That's all.
Yeah, some of that information we do have, others we have to, yeah, we have to.
We had that information during our initial pre-K research over an evaluation over the first 2 or 3 years. From the range perspective, where we sit right now is that we can accommodate any student in the pre-K from range that wants to go. We're at a point where parents are not sending their kids to pre-K because they're keeping them at home. Some of them don't want to send a 4-year-old to pre-K to school all day. So that's where we're at. When we talk about most of the kids coming to kindergarten are coming from homeschooling, basically what we're talking about is they're coming from home. I don't know that there's a lot of homeschooling that goes on there, okay? That's why there is a discrepancy. In one case you got pre-K, one case you got something else. We have very few students that come from other, what's the word I'm looking for?
Facilities.
Other.
Learning centers. Yeah.
Trainings, other
I know what
pre-K
you're saying.
training, yeah, because it costs money.
Yeah.
So parents from Ranch use our pre-K, or they do their homeschooling themselves. Rarely do we get much from, what's it called, Head Start, or any of these programs. We do get them, but we don't get them very often. And when we do get them, it's from kids moving into the community who come with them, and bring that with them, as opposed to opting to go there instead of our pre-K.
And I'd say that's not always the case, right? All of my children attended a private preschool and educationally, so.
What's that?
I said that's, just to be clear, that's not always the case. I can speak to, my children in particular went to a private preschool and then this preschool, so it's not exclusive for Ridge,
But
but
what I was saying is that's very few and far
Yeah.
between.
possibly.
Mine too.
Very few.
You're
What's
not
that?
there.
All of mine too.
Yeah,
They
so
all
that,
do it very well.
right, yeah.
So moving to this next example, and again, this is taking a little bit of time, I think it's important. Because this was a big deal. The community put out a fair amount of money here, and the school board made a critical choice here that isn't talked about, that was brilliant. The 2021 to current HVAC replacement. We knew all of our schools had end-of-life HVAC equipment. We, again, looked at the funds that we were provided during COVID, and we said, what's the best use of those funds? And we were able to grab a hold of EEI, who had done some work with us before. Because of that work that was closely related, energy, which is not on these slides, but that's actually another example of some of this work. We were able to get them to come on in and get the pricing prior to inflation going up, and get the elementary schools all newly fitted with HVAC equipment that also has dehumidification, which is actually very important for our aging facilities. And then we haven't finalized it here, but we're wrapping up, we're getting closer to wrapping up the project here in this building right here. That was done because that group was already here. We were able to keep them here, and the board had a decision. Is it gonna be a lease or is it gonna be a bond? The percentage of what was gonna cost was, not too much different. Lease is a little bit more, but it requires a lower threshold for a positive vote. And while there was some criticism here and there about not going for the bond, the lease was the right decision. And the board knew that we have to make this happen because this is gonna be important financially, health-wise for our school community, financially for our communities, the greater community. And after talking with EEI and getting conservative estimates, this is what we found. That the work that was done, after all of the interest and everything is said and done, is gonna be $8,700,000 for all of the schools, for all the HVAC work. If we were to contract with them today and try to sell a lease or a bond, we would be paying $12,800,000 for the exact same product. That's over $4 million more, and that was just 2.5 to 3 years from when we began. So, to further show the importance of acting quickly in the way we did, even though it cost the community money during the time that we did. They put forward $4.5 million for this building right here. That's a lot of money. If we were to do it now, we wouldn't have ESSER funds, and we would be to the tune of $7 million more. And so we've utilized the resources that we've received at no additional cost to the community, as well as getting them lower tax impacts as a result of acting quickly and doing this in advance. And these numbers are only going to go up. I couldn't believe he said that the elementary alone, he said 60% higher is what you would have had to have paid if you started right now for the elementary, because we got in there so early. So kudos to this board, you made the right decision. We had so many conversations, and these are, again, aging facilities. I won't talk long about this. This is another example of future-focused decision-making, partnerships with local organizations such as Franklin Pierce University. This is harder to see the financial investment because there's other elements to the work we do that we'll talk about staffing. Staffing teachers, staffing education, getting people to support our kids and our learners, and having the numbers of individuals that are qualified to do so is really, we're in a tough time in 2023, and have been for a few years, and are going to continue to be in this nation and in this state. And so we are working hard to make sure that we have the resources we need. And so we are intimately involved in the training of these individuals, and they come to us. We are the primary partner of that school. The restorative classroom at JGS. This is going to be more pertinent to a significant part in the presentation later on when we get to student services. Because as you will see, major increases last year and this year, and certainly much of it is due to things that have happened around the time of COVID. We're seeing some very different types of learners coming in. Great kids, different issues. And we started to see a trend of having to send learners to out-of-district placement. When we send a child to an out-of-district placement, and we do that because we don't want to, but because we provide a free, appropriate public education. That is required by law. It is the community's responsibility to do that. That can cost as little as $75,000 plus transportation, so a little over $100,000 usually. It can cost as much as, you know, $500,000, especially if they're residential, and we have the gambit. The most, I would say, on average, we're spending about $150,000 per learner who is out. Wanting to reverse that trend is the goal. Needing to stop the pattern was the first thing that we needed to do. And so we put in the budget last year an investment. We invested about $100,000 to find a teacher, an amazing teacher, to come in and work with several of our learners and create a community within a grade level. We had to get the Department of Ed, you know, support and all this kind of stuff. That program, if you see on the bottom there, that I'm not going to get into the numbers of kids and all that kind of stuff because I don't want identifiable information here. We conservatively, we saved the district $200,000 because it would have cost minimum $300. All of these individuals would have been out of district place. Subtract the $100 for the teacher, and that's the teacher benefits, all that kind of, you know, thing. It's not just a salary. Some other resources and so forth that the room needed. But that's a conservative estimate. It's probably closer to $300,000. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we lowered our budget by $300,000. Actually, we raised our budget by $100,000. What we did was, even though you're going to see alarming, I think, numbers in just a little bit, when it comes to the support that we need to provide, it would be $300,000 higher annually after that. And so what we are wanting to do is keep our learners in our communities. If we have it at our schools, we can also gauge in real time, can they start to get back into the regular classroom and be ready for middle school and beyond, which is the reverse trend of what we've had. So our goal this year was to stop the bleeding. We still had to put some individuals in position, you know, places that they needed for their own benefit and for the benefit of you know, their learning, but at a much lower rate. And next year you'll see that we are proposing that we extend this, invest some more, but we're going to also indicate that we're going to get basically an even benefit out of that, because we think we're going to start to be able to pull our learners back into district in order to stop the annual spending there as well. So not only don't send individuals, now start to bring them back. That's the type of thinking. Again, it costs money to do that. It saves a tremendous amount of the increase later on. Yes?
I think that sort of cost avoidance strategy is important to communicate, right? When you're seeing a cost, but it's really you need to highlight that cost avoidance where appropriate. I just had, probably not too many details, but just so people understand, you kind of, probably on purpose and for many privacy reasons, speak pretty generally when you talk about different behaviors, you know, or terms like that. And I know that you can't get into specifics likely, but could you be more specific? Just so people understand like what sort of behaviors we're talking about that, you know, our current schools, or maybe that'll wait till later.
I'm gonna let, no, it's fine, because it just means we won't do it later. So
Okay,
it's all
yeah,
the same conversation.
I'll just jump ahead.
It's better when to do it while you're asking.
Yeah, it's
And
just,
so I can do that. I would prefer that Jen, our Director of Student Services, or our elementary principals in particular.
I think you understand what I'm saying. You're
Yeah,
saying
oh, I
things are
understand.
different, but I'm saying.
It's
like,
important, because I did make the statement, things are different. And I think that's the big
Yeah.
shift. And they're going
So
to be
what's different
going
that we
forward.
can't, that we're needing to send these
Yes.
kids out for?
Okay.
I think I know, but.
Yep,
Great question.
it's the question.
So there's definitely a shift happening, and that we're seeing, and it's a nationwide shift, it's a statewide shift, and it's clearly a community-wide shift. That learners are coming in with more trauma behavior-based difficulties. So when you have a student who has a cognitive-based concern and those behaviors, there's some really concrete behavior supports that have worked for a long time, lots of things that have, lots of data out there, lots of research on supporting those learners, and maintaining a process within a school environment. Unfortunately, those of us in our lives who go through trauma react differently all of the time. And so when you have students who are coming in, and COVID is a big part of this truly, but when we have students who are coming in who are unable to regulate in a classroom setting, what that looks like can be really big behaviors. And it's not something that it needs a very different type of support. Generally, they need to have a place where they feel really safe to have big emotions and still have people stay and work through them before they can access education. So it's really small, and it's contained, and it's safe. And that just takes a very different kind of program that's hard to do in a public education setting the way that we've done it for a long time.
And
This
just
is a
to
different
give
way of
you-
providing that.
Give you some very tangible outputs of when a child who is, experiencing these types of difficulties all the time, because it is, and they don't want to. That manifests into, or can manifest, and often has manifested, especially at the earlier age areas in the elementary schools, in elopement, running off property, which is of course a danger. It can also result in destruction of facilities. That's certainly often the case. Leveling, destroying the classroom setting, the hallways, anything. Kids having to, the whole class is having to evacuate, all that. That's not an abnormal thing to happen within a school over the last decade, but certainly it's been, the frequency of it is even more so due to what Jen is talking about. And so that doesn't help anyone. It certainly doesn't help them, and you have that added element of being a small community and everyone knowing your business, and that's your reputation. That stays with you for a long time. It doesn't need to be that way. Yes?
I think there's also the component, right, like we think a lot about students and what they're experiencing and the impact that it has on the environment around them, whether it's the physical environment, the other learners that they're with, the other staff that they're with. But students who are experiencing this level of crisis or this level of dysregulation on a regular basis, it is harmful to them physically, it is harmful to them emotionally. So being able to provide a learning environment that reduces the likelihood that they are going to experience these significant emotional shifts, not only helps them in their larger school community and the larger school community, but it significantly supports that learner's development in helping them to become, I don't want to say they're broken, but I want to say helping them to become whole and have the skills to manage the things that they are experiencing. So it's not about removing challenging situations or difficult things or discomfort. It's about providing an environment that helps students to learn and master strategies for what do I do when I'm experiencing these things. Because we as adults experience these things all the time. Frustration, being overwhelmed, feeling shame, feeling embarrassment. We have developed skills to help us manage them and help us move forward. We're trying to do the same things for these particular learners. And the staff that we have doing it are incredible at their job, and they don't need to go somewhere else to do it. We can do it here under the right conditions.
And can I just add something? when if a child does need out-of-district placement, what that means for the community is that this kid is now on a bus, van, very early in the morning, coming home maybe an hour and a half after their peers. We have a child in our neighborhood who's in out-of-district placement, and wow, this has been fantastic. It's a fantastic place for this kid. Parents are thrilled. The child is no longer in youth sports or scouts because he's getting home so late. So he's not as connected to the community, the Jaffrey Wrench community. So academically and socially, emotionally, I understand the kid is doing very well in his out-of-district placement, but I also see what it's like for this child to come home at 4:30 in the afternoon after leaving at 7 in the morning. That's a really long day for a young person. So when we can keep them in school, they're more engaged in our community, more engaged in their families, and hopefully having the same results.
You know, more just, I don't ask too many questions as we go on, but I do get curious about this stuff. We often mention, like, since COVID, is there any, and I don't think you'll know the answer to this, but I'm just curious as to if there's any research or thought that says that, is this like a permanent change since COVID, or do we expect maybe these behaviors to, you know, regulate to previous levels going forward? I don't know if that's,
I think that there's a lot of research happening right now,
Yeah.
post-COVID
yeah,
stuff. My gut is, frankly, Jaffrey Wrench was behind in catching up to this. This has been happening in other districts at the degree that we're currently at. We were more insulated for a period of time, for sure. I think that, truthfully, I don't foresee it eking back down because it's a case-by-case basis. However, things like early supports and services, consistent preschool, having supports within our buildings so that we deal with these things in our community, in the long term, help us to flatten that curve or support students in a different way. There is a great deal of research on the importance of inclusion, and inclusion not necessarily being in the classroom, but feeling socially part of the community, and the long-term impact on getting and keeping jobs, being part of a community, those long-term impacts that every time we send someone, and absolutely there are students that this is, no matter what we do, we're not going to be able to provide what's really they need here. But when we do that, we run the risk of long-term impacts that we also are hoping to avoid.
And those impacts have the reverse impact that you would want to see on the community down the road. Often.
So would that be identified at the pre-K level in your program? Because I understand the investment for keeping it in-house, so to speak. But those needs should be identified pre-K so that you can address them very early on, just like you do now.
Absolutely, some of the needs are noticeable at age 3 and 4, and then as the developmental pieces, some of it's appropriate. A temper tantrums at 4 is developmentally appropriate. Then you get to kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and we start to see the academic piece, the expectations of sitting still longer, or doing academic pieces longer. That's no longer developmentally appropriate to flit around the room, to have difficulty with your feelings and emotions. So as that developmental stage grows and there's a gap between, that's when we start to see it more. Absolutely, our students get, starting at age 3, anybody who has some of those precursors of any supports and services starts to get those.
Well, that's why I asked, because she.
And the more kids we
you
have in
indicated-
kindergarten at 4, the more we see it earlier, and the more we're able to help in those early supports and services. And our hope is long-term that we are able, and we have discharged more kids this year already than we have in many years. So that whole COVID piece, and we have a lot of kids, and then the extra preschool pieces, we're getting supports and services earlier, and then by late elementary school, we're being able to say, they've closed the gap enough, they've learned the skills to move forward, so.
Thank you.
Jen, the think I heard you say that the outlook for this trend reversing is not good. Is that, well, are there reasons that,
I think that life is hard. And there just are, we're seeing more and more trauma-based concerns. And I think that's just, life is hard for a lot of people.
I spend a lot of time communicating with parents who are also experiencing the same difficulties. And we work with community partners and so forth to try to get the supports for those individuals. There aren't many community supports out. The school is it. So we do whatever we possibly can for our families. We sit down and we listen to them. And sometimes that's what they need, is just someone to listen and actually care. Yes?
The other thing that we are seeing and learning is that as science develops, we have a greater depth of knowledge around the neurology of trauma. And although this has been scientific inquiry for many, many, many years, it's just within the last 5 to 10 years really risen to the level of informing to this depth at an educational level. And so as we gather and learn more about how trauma affects the brain, it helps us have a better sense of how to meet those needs within a school setting. And so as we learn about the neurology of trauma and how it affects us, we can then create programming that more readily and quickly can meet the needs of our learners that are experiencing and responding to those elements of their life.
Which brings us to the elementary draft budget highlights. We've talked about these things, so some of these items we're not going to have to spend too much time on, but priority number one, and this is actually district priority number one, was maintaining universal access to pre-K. This is a tremendous feat that this school district has done. We were able to use grant funding to be able to do that. We were able to find some other staffing within our budget that for about $107,720. It all depends on who you have in those positions, of course. That is salary benefits. It has a part-time paraprofessional in there as well. That is what it would take to maintain in the Jaffrey Ringe Cooperative School District at both Jaffrey and Ringe universal access to pre-K for the following year. That is reflected in the draft budget. You'll see in things in red that it's reflected in the draft budget. Sometimes you'll see, meaning it's in the numbers, like we haven't, it's not just hanging out there saying, oh, can we add it? It's going to be in the numbers that you see. Some of these red lines will say that it's not, and some of it will say that it is in the default budget. So priority number two, which is right up there with it, and this impacts all kids, and this is at the fundamental of our academics right here. And there's been, again, as we talk about brain research, and there's been a tremendous movement toward, I think, a really exciting approach to reading, which many of us have known all along, but systematizing it, making sure it's sustainable is key. And so both elementary schools and the middle school and high school have been involved in these conversations as well, because we want to make sure that we have fluidity all the way through and continuity all the way through. But for next year, we are trying to implement some more research-based universal strategies and use of materials across both schools. We're researching the programs right now. We do know that for a district our size, it could be as much as $170,000. Some of that might include professional development. Title II funds we have cleared for next year. We'll have around $60,000 or so in title grants for professional development, so we are going to clear that, and the first priority of professional development will be literacy, reading at the early level. So we won't put that into the budget, but we will need to have materials. These numbers might be low, 38,000 for Ringe and 30,000 for JGS. Those numbers are, by looking at their current classrooms right now, 18 and 15, 2,000 per classroom. Again, those are probably low numbers, but they give us a foundation from which to work on. And if we have to, close the gap a little bit, it's much easier to do than from zero. But it is something that the entire state is moving toward, actually the entire nation right now. It's based upon some great brain research that is out there. You'll hear a little bit more about that. And then priority 3 here is we have piloted the STEM program, pre-K through 5, over at Jaffrey Grade School. And fortunately, that teacher is going to remain next year, and she's having the time of her life, and you have to. Everyone here needs to go in and see these pre-K, kindergarten, first grade kids working in that type of inquiry-driven environment. They're so well behaved, they're so inquisitive, they're so enjoyable. They're in there for an hour learning, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all linked together. We know the research on STEM, and as it continues to go forward, that you'll likely see more math, more science taken down the road. You'll actually see that later on down in this presentation. And also better literacy as well, because we have better thinking and cognition skills. So we do not have this in the budget. So this is an opportunity to add, because I know the board wants to do that, but, and I gave you a number there, that is an estimate, but to add an equal over in RING, if we have to go and figure it out for next year in a different way, I don't know, we'll see what we can do. That'll be tough. I hate to wait a couple years. It's been highly successful, and it has had a systems impact in a very positive way on staff and staff's movement as well, and we want to see that across our entire, both schools. RMS is doing fantastically, but we can always do better, and this will be better for our kids and staff. I was going to have us talk about priority number 1, but we already have. That was pre-K. But priority 2, I'm going to ask Ms. Zilski, principal of Jaffrey Grade School, to say a few words about probably the most complex aspect of teaching and learning from a subject matter standpoint.
So I'm going to speak a little bit about why we are looking to enhance our literacy instruction at both RMS, JGS, and also at the middle high school. We're really looking at K-8 right now, pre-K-8. And we've been very lucky that we've been working as a whole team, all 3 of us, in addition to Ashley Flamino, who's the assistant principal of instruction and curriculum, as well as Anne Marie and Heather Schulman have all been part of this conversation. And so we've been really lucky to have been able to have collaborative conversations. We've looked at data and have made some determinations regarding how we want to move forward. In doing that, we need to have a depth of understanding around what elements go into learning how to read, and then the transition from learning how to read to reading to learn. So learning to read to reading to learn. And a major component of this is Hollis Scarborough's Reading Rote. And you'll see that at the very end over here is skilled reading. That's when we're able to put all of our components of reading together to have true depth of comprehension, analysis, and be able to use that information to synthesize and move forward. We have at the bottom our word recognition skills. These are some of our basic components of understanding the sounds of letters and words and what letters and words look like on a page. So it's understanding what the letter B sounds like, B, bat, B, and also understanding how to construct it and how to physically make it. And so those are some of the components down here. We've got our decoding, our phonological awareness, and our sight recognition. Phonological awareness, you'll hear a lot about, that is really understanding the sounds that go into words. We're looking at phoneme, onset and rhyme, syllabic work, and then just word recognition. That all falls underneath that phonological awareness. It's the umbrella. It's the way that oral language can be manipulated and divided. So when we look at a word like big, we know that big is made up of b, I, g. And we have our onset, which is the B, and then we have our rhyme, which is the vowel and anything that comes after it, ig. And we can take those parts and manipulate it. We say the word big, big. Now, if I take away a B and I add the letter D, what sound does it make? Dig. So being able to manipulate the sounds is a really important part of early literacy and learning how to read. And that all falls under phonological awareness. In addition to that, we've got our phonemic awareness, which is phonemes, which is the smallest part of a word, those sound components, really understanding the depth of that. And we've got those 5 pillars, which is the phonemic awareness, the phonics, and the fluency. And that's just one strand of the rope. So that's just one component of it. And as we begin to dig into all of the other strands of it, and we move into sight recognition, which is looking at a word and being able to say big just by looking at it, not having to go b-ig, which is decoding that word, breaking it up into parts, but having that sight recognition of it. All of those pieces for not only one-syllable words, but multi-syllabic words. And then we look into some of the more complex constructs of our language. We look at digraphs, 2 letters that go together to make one sound, TH making and then when we look at our vowel combinations, O, U can go ow, our diphthongs. All of that is what we are helping our young learners understand to be able to construct understanding. And then we look at our comprehension, that understanding piece, which are the top 5 components, the top 5 strands of this reading rope. We've got our vocabulary knowledge, and the vocabulary is that breadth of understanding of what those words mean and how they connect. And then when we put it into context, different words have different meanings. When we look at our background knowledge, things that learners bring to us, our facts, our content, building that background knowledge. Our learners come to us with different background knowledge. How can we strengthen it for all? Our language structures, which is syntax, our rules, our semantics of language. Our literacy knowledge, which is print concepts, just how do you read on a page? How do we go from left to right? If you look at a book, where is the title page? Where does our chapter start? All of those are print concepts. And then from our print concepts, from our literacy knowledge, we have our verbal reasoning, which is when influence and metaphor, those kind of concepts come into place. So we have our 5 top strands, which is our language comprehension. We've got our 3 bottom strands, which is our word recognition. We put those 8 strands together and we increase that automaticity. We increase the ability to strategically understand and comprehend our language, and then we become in-depth skilled readers. This is a multi-year depth of process. Right now, at our schools, we have really amazing teachers, and we have some incredible resources that speak to components of these strands, that speak to 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 strands here. But what we've realized is that we are hoping to, through our research and analysis, find just 1 or 2 strongest, based in the science of reading research, systemic programs that meet our 4 elements, which is explicit instruction, that it's systemic and cumulative, hands-on and engaging, and provides opportunities for assessment and reflection that includes all 4 of those components for as many of these strands as possible, so that we can weave those strands together to make the tightest rope at our earliest learner opportunity to get to that skilled reading earlier, so that we can enhance our learners' ability to read and comprehend text, which affects everything that they do as learners and as people within our lives. And we want to do that K-8, so that when they are moving through their life, when they're moving into those high school levels, they have that ability to really break apart and put back together their literacy learning to strengthen their comprehension and movement forward in all content areas. Social studies, science, all of their different ELAs. It affects their writing. It affects their ability to comprehend and explain their mathematical reasoning, because they have their ability to comprehend background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge. These strands affect their ability to move through their education, and we want to strengthen it for them at the earliest possible opportunity so that we can enhance their ability to access their learning all throughout their career. So that's a little bit about Scarborough's reading rope. Any questions about the reading rope? And again, we do have components at our schools that meet elements of these strands. We are hoping to find something that really can integrate, as if not every single thing, as many as humanly possible, and get our teachers to really dig into that so that we can explicitly, systematically, hands-on, teach, instruct, help those learners grow, assess their growth, and then have that inform our instruction immediately as we move forward. Again, incredible educators, some great resources, but we need to pull it together now that we have this science and pull it towards our end goal, which is success and growth for all of our learners.
And as we look at systems, we've talked a lot about professional learning communities, so our collaboration of our teachers and them having that professional time that's focused on data. We talked about what data, the implementation of Ames Web, which has an assessment tool for these strands right here. Pre-K, is it, yeah, pre-K.
Yes, we started with K with
Yeah, okay, there is pre-K, but we started with K, anyway, K all the way through, grade 8. And so we have that data that we can be continuously talking about and then refining our instruction to make sure our kids are learning and having the tools to make sure that our teachers can efficiently, because we talk about effective and efficient is important. We will do this for our kids. It's all part together. So you've got some materials, you've got the science of reading, you've got your professional learning communities, you've got your assessment tools. They all go together to do one thing. And then in order to help that professional learning community and then also to help our kids engage in a different type of thinking process, I'll ask Deanna just to say a few words about priority 3.
I have so many wonderful things to say about the addition of this to JGS. I was not here prior to our STEM programming occurring, so I can speak to the way that our learners and our staff are currently engaging with STEM. We have a phenomenal STEM educator who came to us having experience across all grade levels at JGS and experience as a scientist herself to take on, but our learners are deeply engaged in the work. It's very hands-on. We utilize PLTW as a foundational tool, which is Project Lead the Way, which we actually started because the middle and high school uses it, and there's a great deal of scientific experimentation that goes on to it, but it's not just science, it's that technology, that engineering, that mathematics. There's also some creativity and arts that come and are involved in it within STEM and STEAM. They build, they break apart, they are learning the scientific process as early as preschool. So our preschoolers come in, they are presented with a challenge. Our pre-K through 5th grade, they're presented with a challenge and they find out how to solve that challenge. So right now they're learning those foundational skills of collaboration and communication. STEM is based in collaboration and communication, and if we talk to our middle school and our high school educators and our careers, people speak about what is a skill that they're looking for in people in jobs, and it is their ability to collaborate and communicate, and those are skills that are really at the forefront of STEM. They're using the skills from various areas, bringing it together, and they're challenging themselves to work through what that question is. They build, they break, they build, they break, they organize, and then they come up with a solution. And it's amazing, there was one day that they came out and they were building bridges, which bridge can hold the most amount of weight. And so that was just the question, which bridge can build the most amount of weight? And so we had 3rd and 4th graders engaging with physics and building and seeing something not work and then working with their team to talk about why it didn't work and then reconstructing, rebuilding, trying that out. So it's that scientific process of, creating your hypothesis, scientific inquiry, practicing, having those mistakes happen, and then rebuilding, which is also teaching our learners how we learn. It's the process of how we learn. And STEM does that for us at JGS. In addition to providing our learners with a really brain and neurology forward, hands-on, minds-on approach, one of the subset benefits of it is it has provided our staff the opportunity to have consistent PLCs, these professional learning communities, where our staff comes together in grade level spans to be able to have conversations around data. So PLCs are guided by data. It's beyond just having conversation of thinkings or qualitative dialogue, which is important, but it also looks at that quantitative piece. You bring to the table data about your learners and their growth. You discuss what's working, you use DeForest 4 questions, what's working, how can we meet their needs, what do we do with our learners who don't yet know this, what do we do with our learners who already know this, how do we extend their knowledge? And so our PLCs allow us to have consistent, every single day 6 conversations together around the data about how we can move our learners forward. So not only are our learners having this great benefit of engaging with scientific, mathematical inquiry in a different way, it's also providing our educators and our teacher leaders an opportunity to grow themselves and to have their ability to have really important conversations that in turn move those learners forward in a way that we want it to. So it's doubly important to our learners as well. It provides many benefits and 2 core benefits in that way.
Great, thank you.
Can you go back to the draft budget for this? Because I just have a question, so I just wanted to look at it real quick. We're just talking to priority 2, this is reflected in the budget, and priority 3, this is not reflected. That's the step, okay, so what you were talking about, the reading part.
Yes.
And the money for RMS and DHS, okay. So just a question about, because the community, I mean, it's so hard when you're looking at a school and you're like, okay, well, what program do you use for such? So like with the ropes you were talking about, the bottom, just from my brain, very Wilson almost kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And so the district has gone through that and done that and used that program. And so a couple questions like, how often do we actually need new materials? And I totally understand, things change, a lot goes on, and there's a lot to education where like, okay, well, yeah, this is good, but this is better, right? And so people, the community knows we have all these resources, and the Wilson, I want to speak to that because I know it, has all those components that you were looking for, but possibly not the top of the rope for
exactly.
seeing what we're talking about here. So looking for a program that kind of encompasses all of it, and yet also knowing so basically how often are we going to need to renew all of this stuff and looking in the future, talking about making sure that we have what we need in the future, knowing that, obviously we're going to need new things. But how do we talk to it about, how do we talk as if,
Are we gonna have this conversation every 2 years?
Yes.
And say, hey, it's another 80,000.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we are really taking our time with the process of analyzing what materials and resources and tools are out there to ensure that we are choosing a tool or tools, because sometimes it's not just one tool. Sometimes it is, through this process, we use Foundations in Wilson, and they're really phenomenal at meeting, if you look at the rope, meeting especially those bottom 3 components of the rope, the decoding, the phonological awareness, and the sight recognition. Foundations, which is a program that we use at both schools, really meets that incredibly well. And so if we don't see through our analysis, and we have teachers who are also part of this team of conversation doing this analysis, it may be that we continue to use Foundations for one component of these strands and then find a comprehension component that would meet the top 5. We aren't interested in not utilizing tools or materials that we currently are trained in or have in-house if they are what is best to meet the needs of our learners. We are finding that right now we have tools that meet components. As I said, so we are looking for, instead of having 5 or 6 tools, minimizing that so that our teachers really become experts in the tools that they're utilizing. In regards to the process of change and how often we may need to look at the change, I can't speak to that specifically. I would love to have that, but ideally this would not occur frequently. Ideally we will do our work in depth and with such rigor for ourselves. We're holding ourselves to pretty high expectations around this, that this will be something that we can utilize K-5, K-8 for several years, knowing the financial component of this as well, knowing that we want our teachers to be able to become experts in it, and that's a multi-year process. Knowing that the first 1 to 3 years of purchasing any new component or tool can be more expensive than after, we want to make sure that we're not asking something that in a year from now or 2 years from now, we're going like, oh, that didn't work. Like that we're not, we want to make sure that we are really choosing something that our educators feel will help them be successful in explicit, systemic, hands-on teaching that provides that diagnostic response as well, but also is really engaging to our learners. And so we want to take the time to do that. So my hope is that we are choosing a tool or tools that meet the needs enough that we are not having to fluctuate and come back to ask the board to go through this process again in 3 years. I mean, that the science of reading is very strong and in-depth, and I think we need to listen to that and make the changes that are part of it and continue to respond to that, but I don't see us doing this again within the near future.
In materials that aren't consumable, we would expect several years not to have to
Right.
purchase anything new.
So one of
Consumables might be different.
And we haven't gone through this process in this way for about 14 years. So it's been a long time.
For reading, you mean?
For
Yes, for
literacy.
literacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been a really long time, and 14 years in any
Anything?
business is way
A
too
lot
long
changes.
Yeah,
to not take the time to evaluate the effectiveness of what you're using.
sure.
And so I think Deanna's mentioned like 5 to 7 years. We would certainly want to make sure that we are looking at student data all the time, but certainly that idea of like a curriculum review
Yeah.
is like really a 5 to 7
7
years.
years.
And that doesn't mean that in 5 to 7 years you change and you do something different,
We just assess.
because if it's working, we stay with it, or if we adjust small components, but that review happens, because like Deanna said, the time it takes to be really proficient and really skilled at something takes time too. And we wanna make sure that we support teachers with really robust professional development to allow them to use the tool that we select to its fullest capacity, and with the most effectiveness, so that's gonna take some time.
Right, and in what you just said too, like, how, I know that there's many different ways, like the piloting, I think I saw something happen with that in math a few years ago, but like, piloting different programs and saying, okay, so teacher A is gonna pilot this, teacher B is gonna pilot this, and teacher C, blah, 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 right? And then, as teachers, like, I feel like talking to a lot of them, they do it, you can find so many good things in each of them. They teach to those and they're like, oh my gosh, this is great, and they get excited and they know it. Like, is that how it's going to be tested and done out? Because then you have a teacher who's like, no, this one's perfect, but this one's perfect. And because as a teacher, you almost find ways, because it's an art for you, that you're like, wow, I can do this with that. So then what?
We're going through this process slightly differently than we did for past, from my understanding. We're going to visit schools that are already utilizing the top programs that we're going to be looking at, so that we can see what they look like in real time in classrooms with learners that are at the ages that we are looking to implement. We are going to be looking at national studies and data around these programs. We're going to look at components of it and all of the materials. We're getting samples of all of these. Heather Schulman has put together a huge list of scientific studies that have been done on all these programs. And we're only looking at specific programs that we know meet the majority, if not all, of the components of the reading room. And so we've already kind of eliminated several programs that, although look really great, they're really pretty, shiny, they come in great, colorful packages, but they're missing huge components based on multi-year scientific inquiry, studies that have been done on it. Those have already been taken off the table. And so we're down to, I believe, 4 different programs that we're looking at, and our next step is to talk to teachers who are utilizing it, go and observe educators that are already using it, and so that it's not just us using it for like a month in our classroom and be like, wow, as teachers, we make it work. We know our learners in front of us, maybe we pull in this supplemental material, we pull in this supplemental material, we pull in this supplemental material, and then all of a sudden, we're not looking at the rigor of one or two tools. We're looking at the ability to pull in all of the tools again, and we're right back where we started. So we want to make sure that we're speaking with a depth of knowledge on the tools specifically that we have in front of us, so we can make really informed decisions moving forward. And again, it may be two tools. It may be a tool that meets, the word recognition strands of the rope, and then another tool that meets our language comprehension of the rope. And so we want to make sure that if we're doing that we're utilizing the correct tools. And some of it may be utilizing foundations, but really making sure that all of our teachers have the full professional development package around it. That we're really using it with every component. If we feel like, this is the right tool, let's move forward with that. But then we also need a different tool for the comprehension component, because it doesn't speak to that at all. It's only the bottom three strands. So that's the process that we're going through. But we should be doing a curriculum cycle every 5 to 7 years, where we're analyzing and looking at the tools that we have.
Absolutely.
Because science, our learners change, and we need to make sure that we're using the best tools to meet our learners that are in front of us at that time.
Absolutely. And then real quick, the we. Is there like a committee and teachers that are involved,
Yes.
so that a lot of teachers can
Absolutely.
have their eyes on that?
We have teachers on all levels that are involved. We have reading specialists that are involved, Title I teachers that are involved, anchor classroom teachers that are involved. We want to make sure that the people who are part of this committee making this incredibly important decision for our learners are people that are going to be utilizing it day in and day out. And so we wanted to make sure that their voices were very, we're the loudest on the committee and can look at the data. And so we have really strong educators from both schools and from the middle high school who are involved in the conversation.
And I would say to the teachers that are on the committee, a significant number of the teachers that are on the committee are also currently participating in the free letters training that's provided through the state, which is incredibly rigorous and is science of reading. Like that is all that they are doing. But you're talking about like multiple 9, 10, 12 graduate credits of
An intense program.
it's an intense program. It's like a 2-year, very intense. And they are excited. As they're having conversations in our committee, they're applying what they're learning. Like, so they're really understanding the science of reading. And so that when they're looking at these tools, they're not looking at like, is it flashy and sexy? Does it look good? But they're like, oh, I'm looking for this component. I'm looking for that. I'm looking for these parts. So they're bringing that knowledge that they're building to at the moment into looking at these tools, which is really exciting to see.
Because there's a lot of shiny tools out there.
Yeah, there's
There's a lot out there that looks really pretty with online components and text, and you look at it at face value, and it looks exciting and engaging, and then when you dig in, it does not meet the way our brain learns to read.
Sure. And then so when it comes down to the very final end, and you guys are making that decision, I know you've had, the committees and whatnot, I've heard so many times where there's been a lot of teachers who've been like, well, we all wanted this, but so-and-so just said, we're gonna do this, because that was what that individual liked the most. Will there actually be, in the end, almost like a complete encompassing idea of who's gonna, like, what's gonna happen to the program, rather than just like, well, yeah, but this one was better?
I'm gonna speak personally for myself. I'm not interested, nor do I have the time to invest energy into a flawed system. So like, none of us, the classroom teachers, none of us have spare time to frivolously waste it on something that's disingenuous. We're not interested in going down that road of asking people for input and it just being lip service. Nobody has the time, nor do I feel that I have enough knowledge to make a decision on my own. That would be completely inappropriate. So I'm gonna speak only for myself, but I see Deanna or David nodding their heads like we're not interested in smoke and mirrors and pretending we're doing something that we're not. We're all way too busy, and the knowledge that the teachers have is way too important and way too valuable to disregard, so, no.
And I appreciate that, and I understand that. I've just seen it happen so many
Yes.
times
Yes.
Absolutely.
that I wanted it said. So yes, thank you.
And I'll give an example of a time where we've actually done that.
Mhm.
So like with Ames Web Plus, we did not seek feedback from teachers because we saw the change in the expectation from the state. We gathered some data, we got a little bit of input from reading specialists. And then as an administrative team, we made a decision, but we were very clear about this is why we did it, this is the process. So we're being very clear about times where, no, this is something that we've just made a decision on, which is, that's the only time.
That's the only
I
time.
can
Which
think
understood, I mean, you're
Yeah.
looking at a testing program as
Yeah.
opposed to what these teachers are gonna be implementing
Exactly.
day in and day out.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
yeah.
And
Perfect.
earlier in the slides, we had Stephen Covey who said, you know, he wrote a book on it. You know, change happens at the rate of trust, or the speed of trust. And so building trust, what you're talking about, destroys trust.
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that everything we're doing is building trust, and then we move faster together.
Yep.
I'm going to suggest that we do the secondary one right here, because it relates a lot with what we just heard, and then take a 10-minute break or so, get some food in the oven, and then let people have some food, bathroom breaks, things of that nature. I think that's okay. Is that okay, John?
Sounds good.
Okay. So this next part, and we can, and by the way, if you have other questions, write them down. You can ask them at other times and so forth, tonight or today, or later on, because you might be like, I gotta know more about that. Secondary, couple priorities. Priority number one, maintain current staffing levels. Basically, remember when we had that default budget, CMHS saved the day. They reorganized their entire schedule, removed some positions out of there, really got real tight and efficient. Saved hundreds of thousands of dollars moving forward, and I think also basically sped the process of their change process up anyway, because they were going to go toward a direction that they are currently in, which was good. So it all worked together nicely. We don't really have that card again to play, so keeping things moving forward is really important. We've had some growth, and one of those growth areas is priority 2. During that time frame, we did end up cutting a math teacher out of the high school, and our numbers that were, you know, around COVID time and a little bit before that, and actually since I've been here, I wouldn't say Algebra 2 and above has necessarily been a full course. You have people taking Algebra 1, you get some geometry, but not necessarily going into the more upper level mathematics. Science to an extent too, and both of those, I think, partly because we've had a STEM initiative for several years now, and more kids are taking, more and more learners are taking STEM and getting that kind of immersive environment of what math and science is about. We have a lot more individuals signing up for those upper level maths and wanting to take them, and because of our schedule, they can take a whole slew of maths that they've never been able to take if they wanted to. And so we have put this in the budget, and so we're gonna have David talk to this slide right here. This slide right here is priority 1, and it talks about class size and teacher counts. And then priority 2, which is high school mathematics.
So this first slide just kind of shows the areas of our building and the average class size compared to the number of teachers in that team. Obviously, the average contains the smallest right up straight through to the largest, so it can be a little bit deceiving. But these, you know, for example, when we look at wellness, many of their classes are at or near 30 at this point. With the middle school UAs, the Unified Arts programs, there's very, very little slack there. Most of the classes are in the mid to upper 20s. And so again, that's kind of what's reflected in these averages. This year we did, when we were unable to hire our world language teachers, we did add a creative arts teacher that we pulled from world language. So there was no change to the number of FTEs. But even with 5 teachers here, you can see the average class size for creative arts is still hovering just a little under 20. So even prior to this, it was substantially higher. And my point of referencing this chart is if you pull any FTEs out of the mix here, and with these averages already, for the most part, hovering around 20, the 18 to 20, there would be substantial impact to those classes. And instead of having classes of mid-20s and maybe one that's smaller, you'd have classes consistently, at or above that 25 to 30 mark. World language is a little bit of an outlier with a class size of 11 as the average. That's because our upper level languages only had 2 to 4 kids this year. Again, there's been a lot of turmoil in the language programs. The level 1, 2, and 3 tend to be in that 20 range this year as well. So, any questions on that slide? That was just, again, where we're at with averages and where we're at with staffing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question so much as just a comment, recommendation going forward. I think it's important for us, as an administration and school board to be, pretty upfront and transparent about, enrollment, things like that, right? There's a lot of other information out there, certainly other districts. I know what our enrollment data is, but sometimes the perception around like, whoa, and anecdotal, I'd say, evidence of like, nobody's sending their kids to school anymore and enrollment's dropping. Because, generally that is the case in a lot of places. And it, was the case here, but I think, from what I know overall, we've had fairly steady enrollment,
Yeah.
Post-COVID. Which is good, but I think we need to just, when we're talking about certainly adding staff, be very transparent with the public about, what that is. And that's just not specific to this, but, about all of that. Because I don't think that, I know the information's available, but I think if you aren't very upfront about it, people will listen to the anecdotal stories of, nobody's going to public schools anymore versus actually our enrollment's been, fairly stable the last 3 years. And of course, there are cases of kids going elsewhere.
Right.
But, whatever that story is, the data is the data, and I think we, need to be upfront about that, whether it supports it or against it. I think it's just my recommendation.
Another factor to consider when you look at numbers of teachers in a team is the configuration of classes that are able to be offered with that. When you have 3 teachers teaching, we'll just use math because that's going to be the next slide, those 3 teachers can collectively teach, if each of them are teaching 6 sections over the course of a year, that's 18 sections of math that can be offered. The configuration and availability to leverage schedules when you only have 18 sections of math, and a chunk of those are required Algebra 1 classes, for example, that number of teachers starts to diminish the ability for kids to access even the higher level kind of specialty classes that they might be looking for. So that's another consideration. We're definitely, with many of our teams, there was a time when I started in this building when most of our core teams at the high school had 6 teachers in them, and we're down to 3 in many cases. Our enrollment has not halved, but our teacher capacity in those teams has halved in many cases. Again, that has an impact on the flexibility of scheduling for kids too, and we definitely this year have had issues where kids want to take a class, however, because we have less teachers to offer those sections, their schedule has not worked out and they've either had an opening in their schedule with something else, or in the case of some of our juniors and seniors, have opted to take an open period rather than a class because there wasn't something for them. So again, we're getting to that level, definitely. Ruben was not exaggerating when he said we kind of went to the bone a couple years ago with the default budget scenario. That's literally where we're at. There are periods of the day where when kids move into the district, we struggle to find, especially at the middle school, to find a UA class to place them in that isn't already at 30 kids. So it's not, we're not dire. I'm not saying we need more staff everywhere. I'm just saying additional cuts would have a substantial impact on our learning environments for kids, as well as the sustainability for our staff and access to different programs at this point.
Well, another thing that we've been working on is our the improvement in mathematics. And we've had some good data in the last year or so as measured by the SAT. In the high school setting, we have some work to do across the district. But in our high school, we've seen a nice sharp increase over a couple of year period in time. And that's corresponding, with, at the same time, with more kids taking upper level math. Kind of makes sense.
And that also parallels with science, which I didn't show up here because at this point this year, we only have 3 of our 4 science teachers hired. But we have had a substantial increase in physics and chemistry that has corresponded with this. This year, we have 4 sections of Algebra 2 CP and 1 of honors. We've never had that many kids in Algebra 2. And this is what kind of skews our averages a little bit. This section of Algebra 2 has 11, because when you look at the other numbers here and the availability of these 3, those 11 wouldn't have been able to fit into these other sections anyways. We needed that section to accommodate them. And an Algebra 2 section of 25. That's for math instruction, 25, 27, 24, that's a very difficult instructional setting for a teacher to be able to access and meet the needs of each learner. I taught social studies, a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of content stuff. I could take classes of 30, it was okay. Grading that many papers was horrific, but that's not the end of the world. Math teachers have to provide a lot of individualized instruction and support because their concepts are difficult and cumulative on each other over a period of time. When you stick 27 kids in a room in a geometry CP class and say, make sure all these kids understand the very abstract kind of geometry that they need to learn, that teacher will do it, but it makes every kid's experience diminished as a result of that. So you can see across the board, many of our classes are beginning to rise consistently above a comfortable threshold of 20 to 22. And again, there are kids who are left out of all of these offerings, but in particular Algebra 2 this year because we just didn't have the capacity to add more sections for them. So at this point, when we take, this is about 70 some odd learners in Algebra 2. Not all of these are going to move on to pre-calc, but a good chunk of them will. So you see that there's 9 in pre-calc this year. There's a very high probability that that number is going to be very close to this number next year. We cannot have a pre-calculus honors class of 25 kids. So that's where the request is coming from at this point. Another consideration is 2 of our sections of Algebra 1 this year are being taught by an 8th grade math teacher, and this section of consumer math is being taught by a STEM teacher. Next year, our 8th grade class is about 20 kids larger than it is this year, so this will not be an option for these 2 sections. And again, with our STEM numbers, we would like to be able to not have our STEM teacher teaching a math class. So there's a lot of factors that kind of come into the request to add in that additional math teacher back that we were kind of forced to give up a couple of years ago.
And as you heard, just to highlight a couple points, that you have, if you have a STEM teacher who is teaching this math class, which does have some STEM elements to it. If you had another individual who could take that from that person, you could increase your offerings within
Correct.
STEM as well. The other thing you heard is that 8th grade shifting over to help with the Algebra 1s for the 9th grade this year and so forth. Again, another example of when these schools came
Right.
together,
Right.
an efficiency that was developed, so we had that flexibility to make sure that could happen. Otherwise, we would, we'd already have more people, working in the environment. We've reduced teachers within the organization, not because we want to, but to meet the needs of our kids, have a better collaborative setting, but also try to be fiscally responsible for our community.
There are some years that, just going back to the long-term thinking of the 2 schools coming together, some years we have more signups for, I'll use music. At the middle school, we're able to shift the 2 teachers to teach a little bit more middle school that year. The next year, they might swing back to high school. There's an ebb and flow that allows us to meet pockets or bubbles that come through without necessarily needing to come back and keep saying, we need more staff, let's cut staff, we need more staff. It has definitely been a stabilizer, but this is one scenario where, again, the high school needs cannot continue to be met, in my opinion, for math if we don't add that position back.
Can I just ask a quick question? Not that grades are the true scale that we can tell, but have you seen the data from, like, we're in a full trimester now, have you seen data on the math scores this year compared to like last year? And are you seeing any effect of having such large classes right now on testing?
So it's hard to know if this is an effect of this or not, because this was only 2 months into school. We did get our preliminary PSAT data. We do the PSATs in September, October timeframe, and the results were lower than what they would have been with the same cohort in the fall. So I don't know what that means yet. We're just parsing through the data, and every test is digital this year, so the data we're getting is very different. But we were very surprised to see that this year's juniors had lower scores on the new test than they would have had on the PSAT 10 that they took just in the spring. So again, that's not hard data that I would say run with it. It's very anecdotal, but part of our discussion is what has changed in some of the classroom settings, what have you noticed? Were kids just in the digital exam, maybe not as focused? We're trying to figure out where that came from, but there was a slight dip. And that was across our high school math, it wasn't just 11th grade, but.
Just, I'm looking at the highlights on secondary here, and I guess it's a little confusing to me when you say your major priority is to maintain staffing levels, but then you add one in the second line. I guess it's a little confusing to me.
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying about the math, but when you say our major priority, number one, is to maintain levels, but then in the next paragraph, you say we're gonna add staff.
So that came from my conversation with Ruben and with the finance committee. I said, my bottom line, most important thing right now to continue the work we're doing is to not lose staff. I said, if I'm asked to cut staff, then you're asking me to cut programs. So that's my wording, that was my baseline priority number one.
Okay.
My second ask, my second priority was, if we're able to do it, to add the math position in. But in the absence of priority two, priority one is my absolute bottom line, you know.
Well, that answers my question, but you've included the adding of a staff in the second paragraph. In red, I'm assuming, so that's kind of a hope.
Maybe
So
you
I
should
wrote a
have
question
said
mark next
maintain
to it.
programs and adding staff. I don't know, I can't read it right here.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
think I know
it was
what you're
definitely
saying, but I
written-
don't think that's what
it was definitely written the way we intended, because the high school has done a nice job with its efficiency and has been able to reduce. What he's saying is that my priority is, I gotta at least maintain what I've got. It would be better, if possible, that two, you know, the second thing, that's all. If we stay that way, you know, he's even okay. We can move forward, you know, there will be some stressors, as he stated, with, you know, larger classes coming into the freshman year next year, or the 8th grade next year. But, you know, you figure those things out, it's not ideal. More ideal anyway would be to have a teacher to focus on helping our learners become stronger in an area that they're seemingly very interested in. And of course, it's important.
So that's why I asked, because if it's a question mark, it's automatically been put into the budget. It hasn't been a maybe. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, everything that we put in is, that's why we have these conversations,
Right.
because the board could say, we just can't add people.
I just try to understand, this is all new for me.
No, it's great, it's important, I appreciate the questions. Other questions?
The other thing that I would add as consideration for math in particular, and this is true everywhere, I mean, the literacy gaps, that's why we're looking at a consistent literacy program, and why I said I would like to find something that could continue 6 through 8. The gaps in a classroom are wider than they've ever been, and they continue to grow. But again, when you're looking at literacy, it's different when you have larger groups and you can maybe do some easier pullouts and things like that. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm saying it's more doable with larger groups and class sizes. The gaps in math are also growing, and the more sophisticated the math and the wider those gaps. In that class of 27 kids in Geometry CP, you could have 20 different areas that learners are progressing in 20 different places where they need support. It's hard for me to even fathom how that teacher is managing. They're doing well, but it's at a great cost to their own ability to service some other classes and to their ability to meet the needs of every kid. So it's that widening gap is also a substantial concern that even these numbers don't necessarily give the right level of focus on within a math class. I mean, we have learners who are entering 6th grade and continuing with entering 9th grade, whose number sense skills still haven't even developed. 5 to 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of, but they're coming in not understanding basic numbers, not for lack of instruction, but because, again, the gaps coming in have just continued to compound over a period of time. So anyway, I could talk about it all day, but.
Okay, seeing no other questions right now, I would ask that we take a break. Do you want to take just a 10-minute break, come back, I'll throw some food in the oven, and we can then do another 1 or 2 of these, and then take, I'll bring the food and we can do that as we go along, or you want to take a longer break?
Yeah, sure. What are we going 15.
15.
Be back in,
15,
ready to start.
okay.
Thanks.
This one right here is co-curriculars. So this is really part of, it's kind of part of SAU, part of the secondary, part of the elementary. It's just, you know, it's part of everything in the district-wide. But we pull it aside because we've had some significant improvements in many ways in this area. And by improvement, I mean we've had a lot more participation. We've talked about how that's happened. If you go, I went to Ringe last night and saw the girls' B team and the boys' B team play. You know, the first one was a really competitive game. The second one was good to see the kids out there trying their best. But it's a lot of them just haven't played before, and so they're getting that experience, and that's phenomenal. We have priority 1 here, and so in talking with us, I have to be careful what we talk about right now in public session, because some of this ties with the JREA school board negotiations. Because currently right now, this co-curriculars and so forth is within the CBA. And so Monday, let's put it this way. This past week, the school board negotiating team and the JREA negotiating team came to a tentative agreement. And so that tentative agreement is going to be put forth on Monday, I believe, to the JREA staff, those who are impacted by that, so that they can vote to ratify or not. And then the school board will get an opportunity to then, after that happens, assuming that it is ratified, will then get to approve it as a group or not at another board meeting. So in the meantime, the contents of it all is really not to be discussed, but we certainly know that somehow, whether it be through bargaining or whether it be through some other memorandum of agreement or whatever we're going to end up doing, we cannot continue to function with how we are paying our athletic coaches, especially at the varsity level. We're well below the average. We're definitely the lowest in maybe the state. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly within our area where we would have kind of competition for coaches. We have had coaches, other schools try to take our coaches. That's a real thing. And our coaches want to be here, but they have been offered a fair amount more. So we've, most places are at the minimum 50% more than what we are offering. Some are even close to double or more, but we're not asking for that. I put in here a request for 50% more than what we've spent. For 8 years, we've been pretty good about maintaining that under $50,000 spending. We've kept all of our salaries or stipends even and the same all during that time frame. That's a long time to do that. Again, we just had, 2 or 3 of the, really 2 of the 2 years of high inflation and a lot of things changing, and it's been a difficult, it's not always, we just haven't had the opportunity to change it because it was a little more complicated to do so. I think we're committed to trying to do that, but it will take some extra funds in order to be able to do it. The second priority is already in the budget, has been in the budget, still is in the budget. We're working really hard. We were so close. Heather, we were so close. I thought we had her. The hiring.
We also have one right now that we might steal from a school.
Oh, well, hey, it might even be great. But I guess I wanted to have it in here because I put this as priority 2 because it's probably, probably co-priority one, it's really required that we have this individual. Our nurses have been great. Our nurses in this district are top notch. They're just the best. They have really saved us in so many ways. But it's not their job to wrap ankles and be there at games and get the ice on and make the splints and all that kind of stuff late into the evening. And so, and it's not their expertise. And so when you need to have that, the reason why I put it as a priority, even though it has been in the budget, it is in the budget, is that we haven't been able to hire it, so sometimes we look at, where can we cut? We haven't been able to fill this position. We have to fill it. We've got to keep on trying to figure out how to do it. Earlier this year, we thought we had someone, this distance for this person was too much. So I'm excited to hear that something else is happening. Unfortunately, what Heather is saying is another thing to think about when we talk about budgets and when we talk about warrant articles and stuff like that. Heather just said that, in kind of a joking way, we might steal it from another district. That's what's happening in all staffing right now, is districts are taking from other districts. That's the shortage, and it's not a fun place to be, but this district certainly wants to be in a position to be a desirable location for people to work. And so how we do our budget, how we do our negotiating, all of that, it's extremely important. Heather, did you want to add anything to any of this? You don't have to.
I don't have to, but I will, because there's just, we've created an atmosphere where students want to extend their learning. So I know we talk about enrollment and those kind of things, but our enrollment is there, and it's adding to our enrollment after school. I can tell you right now, between some of the clubs that we have that I think are eventually going to be varsity sports, that's a big deal. But we have other clubs, because of the hiring of some terrific teachers that we've seen with, I don't mind sharing, with animation, that's just getting bigger and bigger. I mean, it's one of our bigger clubs now, but different things. So our students are really getting involved, and I remind everybody, even with athletics, that the after-school stuff is an extension of their learning and taking it to another level and providing it. But it really is being seen in the clubs, and certainly with athletics, as we continue to probably add sports and or just add pure numbers. I've been at all these athletic director meetings, and there's questions about numbers going down at so many schools, and we're not having that problem. As I was doing surveys and those kind of things, our numbers are actually going up, and we're not losing students. Do I get asked a lot about how they can balance, because they still need to work and those kind of things, but our student athletes are resilient in finding ways to still make the money that they have to and still make the commitment to their teams. So on the fact of coaches, we have outstanding coaches, but this also impacts some of our great advisors too. If they've been doing it for a number of years, which some of our people have, they have still been making the same amount of money. I mean, there has been no, if they get to the threshold, as everybody knows, of $3,000, that's it. So you could be doing this you're in your 10th year, and you're still just making $3,000. The drive sometimes is like, oh, am I gonna still do this because of the same thing, inflation and those kinds of things. Can a teacher leave and go take a second job if that's really what they want? But their passion is to continue to teach and to intensify some kind of learning for our students. So I just think that those are why the increases. And there's not one coach or advisor who, I know they're just saying it, but they're so passionate about it that I think they get so frustrated, like, this is unbelievable. So none of them really have left, thank God, because they're hard to find and with a passion. But those are the reasons for it. The numbers are going up.
Can I just add also that a lot of our coaches and advisors work their own job all day long, Then they're coming and spending many hours with our children. During the season when somebody's active, this could add easily 15 to 20 hours to their week just in support of our kids over a span of 6 to 8 weeks of time. These coaches a lot of times are spending their own money when there's kids when they're traveling who don't have access to buy dinner on the way home late at night. A lot of our coaches are doing that. They're trying to get them reimbursed when that happens, but they don't always submit things like that. They're buying equipment for kids sometimes because they view this as a service opportunity to kids in addition to, in many cases, an additional stream of income. So when we say $3,000 is the top line, when you break that down into the amount of time they're spending with children after already doing their own jobs, and the money that I know our coaches are putting into the programs to support kids, a lot of times without us even knowing about it, it's hard to look them in the eyes and say, thank you for your service. You know, here's the same stipend that you've gotten for this length of time, knowing what that commitment looks like for them.
And I will say on the athletic trainer, I talked to a lot of people, the reason there's a shortage is because it's now a master's program. COVID stole away some of the hours that athletic trainers could get. So they said across the board in the state of New Hampshire just alone, in the research that other athletic directors have done, we should be able to hire somebody. They're getting their hours now, but they were limited in how many hours that they could get towards their master's program. As I said, we have advertised it. We thought we had somebody. I just did get another resume, and we're talking to that person. The athletic trainer, though, I mean, Ruben is right. You can't rely on a nurse. The other day, just somebody fell down, and all of a sudden we have a broken elbow. And it was a harmless trip and fall, but after school and making sure, and also our athletes are bigger, stronger, faster. The chances of concussions and those kind of things, and making sure that we're truly taking care of them so that long term they continue to have success, but also beyond high school. But they're competing very hard, and we truly need to have an athletic trainer that can support all of our students after school.
And then you hit upon, again, the theme that we've been talking about with STEM, with the pre-K, with the teachers' collaboration. So it's collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity that happens in our after-school programming, and those are real world skills that they're getting. And then, of course, our districts focus our 3 C's of community, communication, and collaboration. Building community through that is great, and representing their community well. Questions or thoughts?
I just wanted to clarify the clubs and activities, clubs and sports, are they open to the homeschool community as well?
Oh, it's huge, yes. And they attend for both.
Okay.
Yes.
What about private schools? Do they ever send?
So, anybody in the district, non-public, homeschool, our clubs and sports are available to them,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And
Our-
charter schools.
Charter schools, anything, all individuals who live in our communities, this place is, all the coursework. If they're homeschooled, the coursework here still, they can come here and take courses if they so choose, which we do have had several in the past. A lot more use the after-school programming of clubs and athletics.
Yep.
That's actually a nice segue, because charter schools and other schools in the area, we do have other responsibilities, not just co-curriculars and extracurriculars, but student services. And so this is where we have our conversations. We've already had some conversations about trying to make sure that we curb the future spending, trying to keep it under control, provide the right instruction for our kids, the right environment for our children that they need and also are entitled to legally. And so it is the communities of Ringe and the community of Jaffrey is their responsibility. It is the entire community's responsibility to support our learners through public education. And yes, this population of learners, and often several of them will cost more than the typical cost per pupil. So we have priority one. Just, again, staffing all mandatory positions. It's priority number one. We don't really, I wrote this way because similar to the athletic trainer, we have the positions in the default budget. By law, it goes into the default budget. If it's written in the child's IEP, individual education plan, that's a legal document that was determined by a team of individuals coming together over a period of time with usually doctors or psychologists, input, testing, all that kind of stuff happens. We, staff what it is we need. Getting that staff, hiring that staff, very difficult to do. And that is probably our largest shortage this year in staffing is in the area of special education. And that's true about a lot of places. Special educators, there aren't as plentiful as we want them to be. And so staffing that is a priority. But it is reflected in the default budget. And then priority two, which is not reflected in the default budget, but it is reflected in the draft proposed budget, is what we talked about regarding the restorative classroom expansion. So I'll have Jen talk about that, because expansion doesn't just mean the same, like, oh, we have this group of kids that are, I don't know, let's say first, second, and third grade. We want to expand first, second, and third grade. No, we're talking about lengthening the number of years that we would be able to offer these services. And that's, in order to do that, it's about $150,000 to be able to staff it with a teacher. We have to have paraprofessional support in there as well. And depending on the children who go in there, there could be other expenses, but this would be just to run the course.
So because it is, did you want me to talk about it or?
Al, absolutely, talk about everything. This and that. Talk about that first. I'll go back there.
So because it is a special ed program, we have to have, the pizzas are done.
Okay.
We have to have state approval. So students would spend more than 60% of their day in a special ed program for this type of program, which requires state approval. To get state approval, we have to say this is how we're going to run it. This year, you can have 4 grade spans, grade levels in an 8 classroom. So this year, our state approval is for first, second, third, and fourth grade. And we've already realized that we would really like it to go K to 5 or 6th grade in order to have some additional supports across the district. So what we would be looking for is probably a K 1, 2, 3, and a 3, 4, 5, 6, so that there's some overlap and ability to move kids as appropriate, and then have 2 teachers, 2 paras, and then whatever else is needed for the program. And again, $140,000, $148,000 would be the cost of a teacher, depending on the staff that we could find. And a para, again, I would say the same thing that we did last year. We would not do this if we didn't get the right staff member, because it's a special type of person to do this role. We absolutely got the right staff member this year. It's been phenomenal. But $148,000 is roughly the cost of one out-of-district placement when you put into the cost of the placement and transportation. So if we had one person stay here, it would pay for itself. Are there any questions on? I think that the next slide.
Yes, I have a question. In providing services to district students who are in private schools or charter schools, or are there any additional challenges that presents?
So this particular piece would just be to build a second restorative classroom.
Okay.
The additional challenges for the charter schools, absolutely. We talked about this a couple of times in some of our meetings. So public charter schools are public schools, and the way that the state of New Hampshire runs that is that any student who requires specially designed instruction or special ed in any way, the school district they live in is required to provide those services financially, either to provide them within the district to send somebody to the charter school or to pay the charter school to provide those services. And what we have now about, I'm not 100% sure how many kids we have in charter schools, because we don't necessarily have to know unless they're identified. And right now, 4.3% of our identified students are in charter schools. What we are finding is that students that we don't typically find eligible, that we provide a lot of supports and interventions for, that we're able to do a lot of things as the general education setting within a larger school setting. They get to the charter schools and we're getting a lot of referrals that students that struggle with anything end up being referred, and then we go through the process of evaluations, which could cost the district anywhere from conservatively $1,000 for us to evaluate, up to $5,000, $6,000 per person, depending on what evaluations we do, and paying for the staff that are doing the evaluations. Should we find students need additional supports and services, then we either have to have them come into our district and have the parents or provide transportation for them to come to our district to get their services. So if they get occupational therapy, they come to us, and then they go to their school. Or we pay an occupational therapist to go there. Or we pay one of our people, or we pay, in some instances, some charter schools have contracted with other people that we also contract with. Contracted services always are more expensive than services within our district. So that the cost of students in charter schools and the time that is taking is definitely impacting our ability to do our role pretty substantially as we have more kids in charter schools. We currently have kids in 2 charter schools in our area. So we don't have a lot of charter schools, but we have a couple, and we have kids in both.
To tag on to that, it doesn't sound like this would change any of that, though. That's not saying that.
This is not anything to do with charter schools. No.
Right, so even though this wouldn't help and assist that, it wouldn't, no, that's simply what's the state of what's happening. Okay.
Yeah, that's just to answer John, it's just another tax of resources a tax on our resources.
And I think that, I know the answer to this, but it might be an important point of clarification when if we decide to bring this forward, is that this serves like Ringe students as well, even though it's at JGS, right? It's not just a service provided to Jaffrey, it's Jaffrey and Ringe.
Absolutely. So in Ringe, we have a self-contained cognitive program for all students, preschool, kindergarten through 5, in Jaffrey and Ringe, and this would be the same thing.
Right.
This is more of a social emotional support group, and for all kids, Jaffrey and Ringe, grades kindergarten through 5, or potentially 6.
Yeah, just could, somebody who's not familiar could interpret that as like, well, that's just for Jaffrey, but it's
So
really.
why shouldn't we?
It's a more efficient way to do it, right? We have one expertise in one town, one expertise together.
And the budget benefits impact the whole district. So,
Absolutely.
yes, Tom?
Since I'm kind of a dummy, I don't know what IDEA means.
You're not, the acronyms get us all, believe me.
What does it stand for?
Oh, I don't want to mess this up, just a minute.
Individuals with Disability
Education Act, the Individual with Disability Education Act.
Individual Disability Education Act, okay.
It's a federal
Yep.
requirement that then has state implications that can be different than the federal requirements.
So sometimes they don't even know. They know the acronym.
It's just so common. I'm like, am I gonna get this one right? The next slides, Ruben put up, and my numbers are, on one of them is slightly different. I finally got access to some state averages. So in the percent of students identified, ages 3 to 21, we have about 21% of our student population is identified. And the last time I could find state averages, this one was 16-17, and it was 16.4%. The average I was able to find this morning, finally, after reaching out to a number of people from the state, is 18.5. So our numbers have increased a little bit over the years in the percentage overall, But so have the state averages by a couple percentage points. So we're not far off of the state average on that. I have no idea what the state average of identified students in charter schools is. These are all things that, as time goes on, I'm sure we'll be looking at more of that. And then students placed out of district, you can see the state average. The last time I could gather that information was 2015 and 16. I guarantee that we are much closer to a state average. I believe the state average, just in polling last year, people that would respond to me was closer to 5 or 6%. So we're 7.4% of our identified students out of district is quite a lot. That being said, it's not significantly above state average, but if you see the difference from 2015 to now, that's the difference that we're seeing. That more and more public schools are having a difficult time supporting the depth of what's coming into the school district.
And those students would be identified here or there, because you guys identify them, right?
We have to
It's not
identify
like-
them before we place them, before yes. They're
Yeah.
all students who are.
So it's not like they're seeing something and saying, ooh, this has to be,
No.
you guys are
At the
doing
charter
this
school,
identify.
potentially, these no.
If I could ask, if this kind of a chart goes up for like deliberative or another thing, I'm concerned about using the data from 15 and 16 and further, so I like, for me, it'd be better not to have,
Not to have it.
pre-COVID numbers don't count. So that's,
And again, I wish that it was easier to get, or possible to get a state average for some of these, so that we could compare. When we compare to our districts near us, we are at the same spot. We're really, really close, all within percentage points.
that kind of data would be great. You know,
I was gonna say.
what right around there, what we see.
Other districts underneath might work better than that.
All right, any other questions?
I just want to make a comment, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Jen. I had asked Jen a question recently about the restorative classroom, because we're seeing that's already in place, because we're seeing such great success. And I said, where did you get this idea? Like, is this an off-the-shelf program? Did you see this in another district? Did you read about this in your own professional development? And the answer is basically that she came up with it. So
I think that we came up with it. We see a need. How do we address the need? This is what that might look like.
But one of the questions we frequently get is, why do we have so many administrators? Whether we do or not, that is a question that we get. And yet, here's an example of, just one example of what happens when we have a qualified administrator, is that we can identify a problem, create a solution to the benefit of the students, and actually to the benefit of the taxpayers. I mean, that's what we want out of a good administrator, is someone who can create programs and lead and direct. I just want to make that clear, that this is a program that is unique to our district as far as we know, and is successful and cost effective.
I will say that the other districts have programs.
I'm
They
sure.
have self-contained programs. What we have built here is very built on and based on what our need is here, that is slightly different than, I don't know that there's something quite like this.
I'm sure every school district addresses their needs in a certain way, but this program is unique to us, and because we're able to identify the needs, you could create a solution for them.
Yes, Tom.
Again, I'm kind of a dummy with all this, but how is it that these individuals are identified? Do we do it, or does someone outside of the district do it?
It could be both. Most of the time, it's within the district, that when a student is struggling in one way or the other, anyone can say, I don't know what's going on, can we help? And we go through a very legal process and steps. We do some evaluations, we determine what's going well and what's not, and what the extra needs might be. Most often, it's done within the district. as
Okay.
part of a team.
So if I'm looking at the chart, I'm just, again, it's difficult to read it for everybody, but I'm looking at the box in the bottom where you have the circle around 7.4, is that correct?
Mhm.
You know, we're significantly above the state average, and I guess, is that, in fact, all of them are above the state average, or is that reflective of our evaluation process?
So what
Or
you
could
have
it
in front
be?
of you is the state average from 2015 and 16. So
Okay.
that average is what is closer to 5 or 6% statewide. And when you think about state averages, that includes places with a lot different resources and different demographics than potentially some of the demographics here. When we look at places near us, so if we were to compare Monadnock, Messinic, Conval, we are all at about between 6 and 8% of advantageous replacement.
Okay.
So more similar demographics. The ability, bigger school districts with different funding mechanisms may have more opportunity for things like the restorative classroom that we're building, so they're able to keep more students in their district than what we can because we don't have those supports, which is what we're trying to build.
And I think the previous discussion that Lisa brought up is that data is like 8 years old.
It's old, yeah.
We should, and it's probably
It's
likely
yeah.
significantly higher.
Well, I can
We
understand
should
the
have-
data being old, but I mean, my question still stands, is it reflective of our evaluation process?
I would say that even though we're internally evaluating these individuals and having team meetings that determine this, the process is very prescripted, and it's a legal process that districts follow consistently. It's based on data from a school psychologist that's collected, standardized tests that are normed. So is there some room that one team might come to a different conclusion than another? Maybe, but just sitting on enough of these meetings, before Jen was here, after Jen was here, with different school psychs, different teams, the outcomes are consistent because the process is consistent and it follows kind of a prescribed pathway that any school district would be legally obligated to follow. So I don't believe that's likely the case, but it's a fair
Like
question.
I said,
No.
Yeah, you're not insulting us.
I was
No,
just
no,
learning
We're
here.
so thrilled to
So
ask
I
the
can
question.
tell some of the worst
It's a great
questions.
question that comes up, that does come up. I remember sitting in a budget meeting a year or two ago, in a much smaller group, and somebody asked a question, well, why don't we just not put these kids in out-of-district placement? And if that was an option that the team could have considered, they would have done that, because it's not to anybody's benefit to have a learner leave the district unless it's absolutely essential. But there's a lot of cloudiness around the process because it is so prescribed and so, I wouldn't say subjective, I would just say very prescribed, and the privacy rights of children in these scenarios are very paramount to pretty much anything else, so it can be difficult to get that information out, but it's a very good question.
So is the process identified in the Individual Disabilities Education Act? Where is the evaluation process identified?
It's in the IDEA,
Okay.
which is about this, it's
Oh, I'm
about this
sure.
big. But we also have, I'm happy to give you, we have a much smaller procedural safeguards handbook that goes out to any parent or family going through this process that walks you through what your rights are, what you're entitled to, what the school district will do, what it might look like.
Okay.
It is a very niche thing. It's very legal. There's a lot of timelines and requirements, and you have to do things in a very prescriptive manner for the rights of students with disabilities.
And that's not even touching necessarily 504.
Right, I was gonna say.
Yeah. So-
And not every one of these evaluation meetings results in an identification and an IEP at all. I mean, I don't know the percentage, but I, again, sat in these meetings where the resolution is, this does not qualify for an IEP, and then we kind of move to other types of support if needed. But it's not like when a parent or somebody or a teacher says there's a need, we immediately identify them. There's a good chunk of times where that's not the right course of action, and this process kind of shows us that too.
And they have to show that
I'd
they've
probably
got access
fail
to the
too.
curriculum.
I said I'd probably fail too. I need stuff from all.
All right.
Yeah, there's, I would say that there's other factors too, you know, the type of housing available in the community where people can come. And I think in many cases, families themselves are the ones that come in and say, hey, you know, we need some help.
Yeah.
There's something abnormal about what's going on.
Well, again, the school is the community's mechanism for providing social service and educational service to all children and in many cases, actually adult education too, which is something that, you know, this community actually could do some formal processes in place for future.
I also would say, so in our out-of-district numbers that are not reflected here, like it doesn't tear it down, the court systems and Department of Health and Human Services has changed kind of some of their practices. So it's not unheard of now to have the Department of Health and Human Services or the court system to take a student and place them out of district. Without us, that's not something that we would have done. And yet we're still required to pay for the educational piece of that when that happens. So that is definitely happening within our district. We have some students in that number that we wouldn't have made that educational choice, but the court made that educational choice, and then we then are responsible for the educational cost. And then the other piece, what was the other thing I was gonna say? So the court is part of it.
Jen, relating to the court, or the courts, am I correct that in the last 2 years, the law has changed so that we're responsible for students until the age of 22, that we formerly were only responsible for until the age of 21?
Yep, 3 to 22. The
Is there
other
a
piece,
reason for that? What was the rationale?
so the IDEA states that students are entitled to supports and services from ages 3 to 21 in New Hampshire. New Hampshire said for many, many years that was at their 21st birthday, and a couple of years ago, they changed that to 21 inclusive, means throughout their 21st year to their 22nd birthday. Massachusetts, for many years, has provided services through 22.
And is that for students only in a special case who can't graduate, or?
Yep, any student that is identified with a disability that requires longer time to get through school. So any of the students who may be placed residentially are likely to be the requirement of the school district to pay for it until 22.
And that kind of goes to what Ruben has said a couple of times about our responsibility to the families in our district, and us being the sole responsible, increasingly at least, the sole responsible institutions. Where there used to be other services available, many of those services have fallen away, no longer available, no longer funded by the state. We're it.
There are some pros. July 1st, the state passed a new law that students placed by the Department of Health and Human Services under certain guidelines, the state will pay for their placements. So like I said, they've been just placing kids, and then the school is just responsible for things they wouldn't have chosen. The state is now picking up that cost, so in some instances, costs that we have had to pay for are coming back off of our plate. If kids are court placed, there's a cap to how much it can cost us, so even if it costs more, the state then pays the rest of it, so the impact on the school is slightly less. And we do recoup money back, so students that are very expensive, and oftentimes in these placements, paying for transportation, paying for services, when we hit a certain threshold, we get money back in revenue from the state due to the catastrophic cost to the district. But we still have to budget for it first. We still have to be prepared for that and to pay for it out.
Well, you get that the following year.
Yep,
Yeah, you don't get it the same year.
and it counts as revenue, which doesn't offset, I don't know how it all works.
Carrie does.
Carrie understands that. But it is that sticker shock when, at the budget piece.
Are those revenues identified in your revenue forecast? You know, reimbursement from the state for this, for programs of this nature?
Yeah, I'll have Carrie talk about the revenues a little bit later, just to see how nitty-gritty we can get with the revenues, but like, we have revenues, it's inclusive in the numbers.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
But actually, the specific revenues, I don't know if we we lay that out within our budget process usually. Like, there's Medicaid that we get reimbursed for, there's catastrophic, it's called Cat Aid, what's it called
Sped Aid.
now? Yeah, Sped Aid now, it's a different name.
That way you can identify the out of district, if you will, that kind of sum.
Tuition, people pay tuition.
Against your reimbursement, so you kind of have a
Yeah.
clear picture.
Yeah.
What it really is, I know you have to budget for it, but even if you get it the following year, it'll show up on the next statement, so you'll see the previous years on this year's statement.
All right, at this point in time, I do have some pizza out there. The theme with budget, I mean, you have been emailed the line-by-line item, but there's a lot of line items on this sort of thing, but there are some things that stand out. And this is actually still in exploratory mode. So I will have some recommendations on, not finalizing a budget on Monday, because I think there's some more interesting stuff to find about energy. We might be able to cut some things, is what I'm hearing with my conversations with Carrie, but right now, the data that we have is what we're using. So in addition of about almost $100,000 for all of the utilities and the insurance costs. Insurance, in a general, it is over $70,000 that we have. That's about a 10,000 or so increase to what was last year. And then, of course, electricity, fuel, and so forth. We are going to be using more of the wood chips, or is it pellets? I think it's both. And in theory, because of the new HVAC system, we're a little unsure yet as to what that means with our propane. Typically, if we're going to rely on one more than the other one, you use less of the other one, but they both, even though there's that redundancy, sometimes they're both happening at the same time. And so we have to see what's happening with that. We won't know for certain. We're not going to budget so much and have a super cushion. We think we can budget basically what we need. But yes, Sandy?
I'd just like to, as the facilities director, I'd like to put out there that the idea is that we are gonna have some energy savings with the new system. So we are, until we actually run through a whole season and a whole year of it, we're really not gonna be able to see where we're gonna save money on either the propane or the biomass. But all three of those, we have 2 propane boilers and the wood boiler. They all run simultaneously. And they're heating up the glycol loop that's throughout the building, okay? We added to that when we put some of the units up on the top, so there's a larger glycol loop. So we added lineal footage to what we're heating, but we have a much better system in there, so the efficiency should be better. So we should see some coming down, but it is unknown right now. I think we really need to get through a year so that we can manage and take a look at what it looks like.
And along those lines, Mike from EEI, the gentleman who's kind of, I guess their marketing person right now, but he was an engineer for the systems and who oversaw the energy project that we did in 2017. When we did all the light changes and everything, he did indicate that, in my conversation with him, that if we had not done that, we would see between a 30 and a 40% increase from where our current electricity usage is right now relative to that. So, again, the school board did a nice job with that throughout all the schools, so that was good. That was a while back. But it also, that one more importantly to me, was what allowed us to piggyback and get them in without having to go through this massive process that we would have not been able to use the grant funds for. Number 2, have enough budgeted for emergencies and repairs to these aging facilities. We have under budgeted that line several years in a row. I mean, we're not asking for astronomical increases, but more like 10,000, 15,000 in each of those lines. One of them stays the same because we made that 15,000 jump, a previous year. But if you look back into the actuals over a couple of years, or a couple of years in a row, where we were spending $140,000 on repairs in a specific school area, mostly the middle school area. We had all those pipe issues, other things that are just continuously happening because we have old buildings. Again, future focused, just for food for thought. 15 years ago, new building over Route 202, would have had all new fields, would have had lights, would have had all that kind of stuff. Would have had a new building, HVAC system, all the millions that we spent probably comes to about what would have been spent for that building it would have been paid for last year. And we'd be having different conversations. That wasn't the case. Building aid no longer exists the same way that it existed back then. And so that would have been a nice future-focused type of approach, saying it's going to get more costly. Same building now, I mean, a year ago would have been 80 million without building aid, unless you really had it planned out. There is building aid still, but it's kind of you have to fight for it a little bit more. And yep, and there's a lot less of it. And it would change some of our other conversations around CTE and so forth, but that's okay. Decisions are what they are. You can't change the past. We just have to keep on thinking for the future. But it is an interesting thing to think about every once in a while. Continue the paint and flooring work in all buildings. The budget that you'll see here does have less money in those lines than, say, this year. Part of that is because, or it's all because we added money to those lines earlier this year when we had that increase, so that we could speed up some of the work that we needed to get some healthier flooring in some of these schools, and also to keep the painting process up, which is certainly uplifting for everyone involved in the buildings, and protects things as well. Then the fourth one, it really comes around to just having the proper equipment, staffing, and supplies. I separate equipment from supplies because a vacuum cleaner, for instance, if I put $2,500 in there for vacuum cleaners, because it's underneath the $5,000 threshold, even though that in the past it would have been equipment, it's actually a supply now within our budgeting process. A tractor, however, which we have a tractor that's done, with all the mechanisms that we need. This is probably an under budget. We have two quotes that are closer to 50,000, but I did find some other things online out in the Midwest that were around the $40,000 mark. So we put that conservative number in for now until we get the third and the fourth quotes and so forth. But the two that had come in really been very close to one another, around 47,000, 48,000. And then we are constantly looking at staffing modifications. We're not looking to add FTEs or anything, but to kind of look at how staffing is done within the department. And so we're in the process of doing that to make sure everything's done in the way it needs to be done in an efficient and orderly manner. So again, staffing is reflected in the overall budget. No real change to that. The tractor, the $40,000 is in the proposed budget. It's not in the default budget. Vacuum cleaners and other types of mechanisms like that are in the line items. And you will see an increase to the emergency repair line. And as stated before, priority one, because we know we even had this conversation before, this was the hardest thing we had at the default budget, was we're so underfunded in this particular area. We might be able to, within a week or so, be able to change those numbers. Jerry, did you have any information on that conversation around utilities? Just the possibilities?
Yeah, just the possibilities. So Sandy's reaching out to Froling and CRW to see if maybe we can lock in or determine better rates for next year rather than using the New Hampshire Department of Energy prices that are posted on their website. So if we're able to determine we can get better rates than that, then I'll be able to adjust the utilities.
Thank you.
Is the tractor just lawn mower?
No, so what we have right now is we've got a 1987 John Deere 755.
Yep.
And it's used for, in the wintertime, for snow removal. It's used for mulching, depositing the mulch around the different areas of the district, and also for bushwhacking. The loader end of it broke at one point. They took it to a machine shop, they got it welded, and it's just not the same. And every now and then when they're using it, it'll pop off again, and it's a nightmare to get it back up on there, and it's just seen its days.
So is the 40,000 that's budgeted in this slide, is that reflective of the sale value of that machine?
No, we did not put that in, we didn't consider, and I don't know if we could do a trade-in on that tractor with whoever we choose to go with, if we could do a trade and get money back towards it, or if we could do a private sale and sell it outside. But that's definitely something that we would definitely be considering that.
At an 80, what did you say, 87?
87, it's 1987, we got it in 1988, brand new.
It's probably worth about a third of what this 40,000 is. Maybe a little, maybe a quarter, 20% anyway.
Well, then we probably budgeted, correct,
Yeah.
because it looks like 50,000 is closer to
Thank
the
you.
mark, with the add-ons. I don't
Yes,
think it's
that's
just
with all the
tractors.
attachments,
Yeah, we're talking
so,
about with the attachments, yeah.
Just a question for you, who would be the best person to possibly get an assessment on that tractor as to what it's worth today?
Well,
Any of the places that we're looking
I don't know
at?
where you're getting your quotes, but why don't you ask them?
Chappelle and,
You go to used equipment, you go online and search for John Deere tractors used.
okay,
It'll give you a pretty good idea.
and Pinnacle, I guess, was the other, I have quotes from Chappelle and Pinnacle right now.
Yeah.
So either of them should be able to give us an assessment too, then, I would think. All right, excellent.
Yeah, I did go on to John Deere,
Sure.
it was in a 17, there were some, that around the, I
It's
didn't
an
know the
old
model,
tractor, I
but
guess.
around 17,000, it was an early, like a early 90s. So.
You won't
yeah.
get anything for a trade.
Okay,
Oh, so it's better private sell it, is what you're
Private
saying?
sale,
Okay,
yeah.
awesome.
our district's policies would actually ask us to do that anyway.
Yeah, we can't just unload something without, there's a process.
Thank you.
Questions about facilities? I'll make a blanket statement that there is nothing within the facilities budget, the general fund, that is for the purpose of like construction or large improvements or anything of that nature. This is really about keeping things running,
Standard operating.
improving the looks of things, and making sure that health and wellness is taken into consideration with the proper cleaning supplies and things of that nature. It's very similar, in some ways actually a little bit less than what we've budgeted for in the past, but it's identical in the whole scheme of things, what we've had. District-wide, there's a few things that go district-wide. One of them is salary increases. Again, priority one, maintain staff. I've read some articles in the paper about some other places making some very interesting comments that would absolutely devastate their organization and cause them some significant legal problems. I hope that those places do their due diligence before they act foolishly. But here, maintaining staff and continuing the movement that we're making is important. We're not asking to, I'm not asking for an assistant superintendent, I'm not asking for a curriculum person. We removed those from the budget years ago for cost savings purposes. We've been able to continue on. We have a very different leadership model in this district anyway. It's a very diverse leadership model, not a top-down approach. It's a more flattened hierarchical, it's not a hierarchical model, basically. So a lot of us do a lot of things. You will come to our district and we're in the schools, we're doing our work in our offices, we're going to Concord, we're doing everything. any one of us could fill in for anyone else. So there's a lot of redundancy of capacity for that. But we're busy. So, this is not just SAU, this is a category of SAU staff, all administration, anyone who doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement, basically, this is who it is. So there's the support staff and the teachers association, they both have associations, and so they're not within this right here. Yeah. The second one is technology, right? So we've been through these conversations. This is an area that sometimes in the budget process we're able to pre-buy, and that has worked out, and other times we've cut some things to see if we could get by. During that default year, we ran into some fairly big problems, especially when it came to mandatory assessments. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that. We've talked about that. It was a disaster. And we're, I think, getting to the point where we are, we have the supplies and tools we need, but we got to keep on making sure that everything's updated and that we keep that cycle, which is really the bare minimum cycle of 3, 6, and 9 going every single year with the Chromebooks. Chromebooks are really a cheaper solution for technology. A lot of the research and a lot of their textbooks, in a sense, are on that. You carry around a device as opposed to 4 or 5 books. That's helpful, but also it's used in every classroom. There's a lot of writing that goes on, and that's done technology-wise. With technology, sorry. I have some of the notes on that. There is also a need for reliable internet and for safety. So it's getting, kids are getting more sophisticated when it comes to getting around firewalls. We have to have stronger firewalls, for the protection of our children. And we also know that our wireless access points are getting older, especially at the elementary. The school is not so bad. The elementary schools, and so it costs quite a bit to get that equipment, quite a bit, maybe 20,000, 25,000. I have to look at the spreadsheet that Mike put together. But all of that together is an increase of about $124,000, $125,000. Not wanting to kick that out of the budget again. That was one of the most harmful things we did. That was a bad decision on my part to try to risk it. Another thing having to do with the district-wide that really Carrie and I didn't want to change, but we've had, I think, a couple of years of conversation around this, and this is the place to talk about it right here. The school board, you are here, think about it right now, you made your $500 in this stipend today and then on your Monday board meeting. This board has, just like some other conversations we've had, we haven't had a raise for board member volunteerism for positions for as long as I've been here. I assume that was maybe that way beforehand as well. And if you were to look around us, we are very unique when it comes to that, I think. There might be some outliers. I think we are the outlier. But,
did you see the document I shared with you?
I did not yet. Let me go.
Oh, yeah, put that up.
Okay.
Oh, it should.
Did you share it through email?
Yeah, so last May, the policy committee did some research, and we agreed to ask the district for a stipend increase. And so, yeah, I just shared. You see it there?
My mouse isn't working. Sorry, I'll get it.
So we did a local school district reconnaissance to see what local school districts are doing for stipends for their school board staff. And it's not just the school board members, it's also the district clerks and secretary, things like that. So there's numerous things. Our current policy, I'm not able to access, the wiki wasn't opening up for me. But this is something that's written in the policy, how much school board members get. So we started with the policy committee, agreed as a group to what we'd like to see, and then it just kind of missed getting back to, that was back in May, so it just kind of missed getting into the process. So we do have a recommendation to propose there. And basically what it is adding to the line item for school board stipends a total of $3,200. That would increase our current school board member stipend of $500 to $1,000, which comes to just at or below what our local school districts are doing. But it also includes a $200 increase for the school board chair, which nearly all school districts have a separate additional stipend for the chair position. So this document that will be enlarged shortly shows the school districts that responded to the reconnaissance. And the last one, Monadnock, gave me what May did, but they increased it substantially since May. Our treasurer, deputy, and clerk were recommending keeping at those numbers. If you see zeros in other school districts, that is because those positions are paid through their salaries. We have a stipend for that position. So any zeros you see are salary related. I will mention that Monadnock School District has upped their school board, I forget the numbers, that was their last year number, but they now give their policy committee chair an extra stipend too. Just putting it out there.
I don't know who the policy committee chair is.
So we are recommending that instead of $500 for the school board chair, each year they get $1,200. For each school board member, instead of $500, that they go to $1,000. The others we would recommend keeping the same. So an increase of $3,200. And I put the line item in there just to see for that.
And I would like to add that it's been over 20 years since those line items have increased.
Can you say that again, Charlie?
It's been over 20 years since that line item has increased.
So 20 years ago, they were in the same amount we are in today, with a lot less work. They have here the committees and here the requirements for each committee.
Not a get-rich-quick scheme at all.
Okay. We've talked already, I mean, other things that are within district-wide is, along with, and this is throughout the entire budget, is just that we did have a 5.2%, according to healthcare increase, and so that's a little bit.
6.2.
6.2? They just gave me something with a 5.2 on it, but I thought it was 6.2. And so anyhow, it was a little over $200,000 increase to the entire budget as a result of that. And so that's a fairly large, that's an increase that was a kind of a have to. Some of that's in the default, and some of that is non-default. So it's in the default if it's part of the insurance for people who are in collective bargaining agreements. It's not in the default when it comes to the district-wide lines, because we do not have that legal bargaining group and agreements. So that's the idea there. So when we look at this right here, and you have that on your paper, maybe you can see it a little better. I should enlarge these. But you have last year's approved, which is in gray, the default, which is in green, and the proposed, that's draft proposed, that's above that. It's a 5.5% increase to go to default. It's 2.8% more on top of that to go to the current proposed. And then there's some races in some of your handouts as well about what what a draft proposed budget would be and what a draft, what the default budget would do for taxes. And you can see that right in the middle there on the papers that you have. Carrie, do you want to add anything to tax rates or anything that we really want to talk about?
Yeah.
I was noticing that Ringe seemed to have higher tax rates this time around. Is that due to ADM?
It's due to ADM
Yeah.
to some degree, but the valuations, the property valuations between Ringe and Jaffrey are widening.
Are pulling apart from one another.
Yeah, that's where I noticed a significant amount, but when you're looking at this too, the estimated tax rate change that you see on the bottom, that includes the statewide education tax, which we don't have any control over. So the local tax rate is what you see on the bottom right. That would be the estimated, of course, because we don't have all the information now, so we're using some current year data based on and estimates we get from the state to determine that.
And as we know that just in recent days, the Conval lawsuit was awarded, well, no one was awarded anything basically, but it was stated that indeed the funding mechanism or the approach at the state level is unconstitutional. The state has woefully underfunded public education, and they have done so at the expense of the towns and the local taxpayers. State of New Hampshire, the way it funds education, certainly the whole system is set to pit individuals in the community against schools, and it's an unfortunate situation. The state, they're asking to more or less double what they're paying, but that doesn't even come close. It comes closer, but does not come close to what inadequate education is. We, year after year, even with rising costs, because everyone's costs are rising, we'll see what it comes out this coming year, but we have been the lowest on average over the last 3 to 4 years per pupil cost in this entire region. We're in the bottom quartile of the state of per pupil cost and spending. Unfortunately, tax-wise, the local communities get hit harder, and that's how the system is rigged, unfortunately. And so, just something to think about as we continue to need to fight for our towns here by getting the state to do what is constitutionally their job to do. It's not okay what we have to do in order to raise and appropriate funds for children for a good future. Yes?
Do you expect any change by, let's say, next fiscal year?
No. It's been kicked back to the legislature. I asked our attorneys that. They won't come and say anything yes or no, but I would suggest it was not a uplifting conversation.
Yeah, it's, last time the courts made a decision at the Supreme Court level, about 25 years ago, and very little changed. The legislature decided that they didn't have to act. Doesn't have the force of federal law, the Supreme Court at the state level apparently. They made changes, but they were not consistent with what the Supreme Court ruling said. So I expect a similar process here. But having said that, we should talk to our local legislators because it's not as much of a partisan issue as many other issues are. There are both democratically controlled and Republican controlled communities in the state that benefit from this funding formula, and communities like Jaffrey and Ringe, we don't.
No, we're we're not helped. When you think about, just as a side note, when you think about the fact that there are a couple districts around us that spend between 3,000 and 6,000 more per pupil than we do, you know, I look at all the systems we put in and these amazing people that I work with and the teachers and what we could do, oh my goodness, if we had that type of funding. But we'll continue to try to be as lean as possible. It's just unfortunate the numbers don't bear out that way.
Is, not to get too far into the weeds on this issue, but is that, from what I remember, there were kind of two decisions, and one of them was like as far as that, with, you know, the statewide education tax and the donor towns, that wasn't allowed. And was that to take effect immediately? Do we know how that would affect us, or?
That is a good question. I do think it's supposed to take effect.
Yeah, that was the one that I
Sooner,
think is
yeah.
wasn't kicked back to the
I don't,
legislature.
but I don't know enough about what it would do.
Yeah. Just something to, I don't know either, I don't think we're a donor town though, so I don't.
We are not.
It would not hurt us, right? So I don't know what the impact would be, it may be minimal, but
We
something
call
good to
them
understand.
Free rider towns. not
Yeah,
others.
but it would be something good to understand if there's a positive impact there.
Yes, you're right, and unfortunately, I suspect that the financial help is not gonna be as much. But it's a great question, and we should be able to get an estimate on that at least.
I believe the article in the paper said the Attorney General was considering appealing it,
No doubt.
which just extended, you know.
Which is gonna, it extends the time, yeah. So other considerations. You know, you have a handout that has kind of a budget summary of what the default information is and what our choices are. That's the language that is used on that form, and the difference and so forth. When thinking about budget, there are a lot of factors that you're aware of that you need to consider and provide us some further direction as we go forward. We have a warrant article that we're going to be putting, most likely, we will have a warrant article for the JREA CBA. What I can say, I think comfortably, is that the tentative agreement is a 3-year contract. The contents therein, I'm not comfortable talking about until the association has done what it needs to do. But we've updated the board, anyway, on a lot of these items, so nothing has really kind of come across as a shock that way. We annually have had some sort of language around a warrant article for special education trust. And then also for facility improvements. We do have some, Sandy has put together some documents of the order of what she'd like to see done. Safety is on a top priority. That involves, and some of these things we're going to start working on this year with our current funding, but out exterior locks. And then also we want to move in the next year or two on interior locks within the schools. There's a reason for that. Local PD and fire want us to have our doors locked for safety purposes. The world has changed, and when they have to be locked all the time, that's good. But if you can't get your key in and unlock it in a situation to get into a classroom during a lockdown, that poses a problem. So when you have an entire class out in the hallway, so it's kind of this. It works if things work. And we have very old locks. As for the exterior, the reason why she indicates that that's a higher priority is because we have a history, a past history, that's what history is, I guess, of a lot of people having keys, grandmaster keys, master keys to the facility. So we may have collected many of those over the years, but there's no way of knowing whether we have them all. It's most likely we don't. And so these buildings you can get into if you wanted to with the proper equipment. We have been able to handle the fob issue. That's all been done a couple of years ago. We had fobs out there as well, so that's not a problem. Windows, that was on the Turner. Windows and doors both for various reasons, but windows and doors across the district needed to be on a cycle, and that was the Turner recommendation when the engineers came through and gave us their suggestions as what we need to do. We of course did the HVAC, that takes care of probably the biggest issue that was on their list, which is great. And that's good for another 20 years or so. Obviously, there will be some fixes that will have to take place, no doubt. And then conversation is when we talk about bigger projects, JGS parking lot, we've identified that one a while back, and that did not go anywhere. It is and has always been, since I've been here, the parking lot that has needed the most support. It also was the most expensive one to do, so we understand that. So getting a plan as to how we want to go about funding and fixing that at some point would be good. We were able to, of course, extend the parking of there several years ago by putting the sand gravel lot in there, which certainly helps significantly that way. And it's held up very nicely, but it doesn't change the fact that the rest of the place is in a tough spot. But we haven't had a sinkhole there for a little while, that's good, right? My car has, I love how I pull in, no one parks over the old sinkhole where that patch is. I do, and I'm like, I wonder, see what happens. And then ADA accessibility issues as part of the doors with bathrooms. Yeah. Not saying redo all the bathrooms, we're saying every building needs to have at least one ADA truly accessible bathroom where they can get in and do everything themselves, as opposed to someone in a wheelchair would need to be able to do that. But once you touch a bathroom to do that, you gotta do it right. So that's some planning that we could do. All right. Thank you.
Questions?
And you can direct your questions to Jen Horn, David, Nikki, and Deanna. Heather is off the hook today because she had a rough game last night. So, yeah, I'm joking. But if you want to direct to them, it's fine.
This is more of a comment than a question at this point.
Yes.
I sit on the finance committee, I sit on the facilities committee. We go through these budget requests and everything seems so unreasonable. Nothing big. You know, no one's saying new addition or, you know, a whole new program. This is very minimal stuff being added to the school budget. Position here, position there. And then you get to this page of the cost, and you know the impact on taxpayers, and it just hurts. I mean, because it's obviously, it's our taxes too, right? And that's the struggle that we face, that this Supreme Court has, State Supreme Court has recognized that it's just not fair. And it's not just, and it's not constitutional. But in the meantime, we have to get this bare minimum, what I think of really as a bare bones budget, passed. And that's the struggle. We're not asking for anything big. We're just asking to continue to grow our school in a very minor way. And how to do that in a way that taxpayers accept, appreciate, and will vote for on the street.
That's a great observation. And it reminded me of one of the things Ruben said early in the day when he was talking about the HVAC work that we were able to do half with government funds, the ESSER funds, and half with a bond issue, not a bond issue, well, it was a bond for a lease, is that right?
It was lease, it was a lease,
It
yep,
was a lease.
yep.
So we got the support of our community and the representative, the project director from Environmental Engineering Incorporated, EEI, told Ruben recently that the $8,700,000 we spent would today be $12,800,000. And that probably means we wouldn't do it, because I don't see how we'd get the community behind coming up with that kind of number. And this would be after ESSER. Community stepped forward and they, funded the project. We got a good outcome, but we do know how people are feeling about their taxes. Everybody just got their tax bill. It's a shock. Not just in our district, by the way, but we're talking about just our district. And the thing is that by funding that HVAC project, which is just one example among many that we went over today, the community saved money, big money. And it helps to make these schools viable places for the next 10 or 15 years. And what's the alternative? If we had not passed the HVAC project, these buildings would be increasingly unusable and dangerous in the event of a new health emergency, like the one we had in 2021. So now we're talking about a lot of things, but one of the big ones is student services. And where did that all come from? Why is it? Is it just the pandemic that caused so many severe disabilities among young people coming in here? We're pretty sure it wasn't just the pandemic, but we don't know really what the answers are. But the innovations that we're trying to continue to implement, like the HVAC project, there are ways to keep us moving forward and spend less money through the restorative classroom. But at the same time, they're keeping our communities good places to live, places with good schools, places where people can feel fairly confident. And so we have a lot of communicating to do. And I mentioned to Chris earlier that his comment about transparency on enrollment, he's right. And we need to be transparent with our community on everything. But we need to make sure that people are hearing, that they're hearing what's really happening. They're hearing what the advances are that we're making in sports and clubs, the advances that we're making in student scores and learning and mathematics and science and all the other subjects. And hopefully people come to the conclusion that maybe it's the state funding policy, maybe it's just the changes in the cost of everything, but we're doing a good job here, as good a job as you can do under the circumstances.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Since I'm the newbie here.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at all this paper that I've got.
Mhm.
And I guess your presentation was intentionally small because I had a hard time reading any of it. So I'll read these now.
Yep.
So, if I'm reading this correctly, last year we adopted a $31 million budget. Does that sound about right? 30,308,000. square foot is my space,
Yep.
correct?
Mhm.
And so, now, if we have a default budget this year going forward, it's gonna be 29,719, does that sound right?
No.
Pardon me?
Nope. This,
It's unknown, we're looking,
Well, it says default right at the top.
that's the assessment
Right there.
of the appropriation.
that's the,
That's less revenue, so 32.
yeah,
So we're,
okay.
so we're gonna go up, I'm just wanna make sure I've got it right here. So, we're gonna jump up a couple $1 million just for the default.
Yeah.
So your proposed budget is gonna jump up, another couple million, so there's really not a whole lot of difference, am I reading this correctly? You're
It's
gonna
just
jump up
under-
$1 million,
It's under the-
900,000.
you got 31,308, and you got 32,406, so we're gonna go up $1.1 million for the default budget. And if the proposed budget is gonna go up, call it $2 million and change. If I was a voter, I know where I'd be voting.
Mhm.
And so, I guess I'm gonna ask, probably really the first question is the $250,000 that was voted on at that special meeting included in this proposed budget?
It's
Because it was
included,
added to the budget, it didn't go into a specific purpose.
it's, what answer? The 250,000 that was,
Yeah, so it's in this year's budget, it was approved by the voters to go into this year's budget. It went into facilities for this particular year. So when we're doing a default budget for next year, the default budget is based on the prior year's operating budget. So it is part of the default budget for next year.
So even though it was extra revenues that came through, it was voted at that meeting to go into the budget.
Correct.
So
It
the
increased the
default budget
appropriation.
so the default budget is increased by $250,000 essentially by that grant. And to go to Chris's point, on clarity, at that meeting, none of this was discussed to say that this will add to our default budget going forward. Am I saying that wrong?
Well, it increases your appropriation, so
I get that.
it's
But
just
it was an
offset
extra
by
grant
revenue.
that kind
So
of was a
you're,
windfall and we dropped it into our budget.
it's a tax neutral impact, so I think maybe that's where the confusion is, because it's offset by the revenue, but the expenses go up and so does the revenue.
But going forward to the default budget, you don't have that revenue in here now.
It's all part of the adequacy aid, so it's
Yeah, we
built
still have the
into
revenue.
adequacy aid.
So the extra adequacy that we got, we're gonna get
Continue to
again
get.
this year?
Yeah,
So it was just an increase in the adequacy that
Yes.
fell on them.
yes. And I guess, and just further reasoning behind that too, because we did understand that was, as to John's point, doing something now, right, is likely cheaper than doing something next year, being that it was tax neutral there.
And so that money has been spent or is currently being spent on painting rooms
No,
and floors.
it's not a problem spending it, I mean, we got it.
Right, but just, because I think there was a little bit of confusion of how that money was going to be used, and it is assigned a purpose, it's being used by facilities. And you can imagine buying a can of paint this year versus buying a can of paint in 3 years, the difference in price, so.
I own multiple properties, so I get all that, you're not telling me anything I don't know. It's how you spend it, do you do it one way or do you don't do another, so. I'm sure I'll have other questions when I see the details, because I haven't seen a detailed line item budget other than this, which you handed me today, and I'm hoping that I'll get that at some point.
I would like to put in a note, since Juno's not here, and I know that you should do that, that the budget development calendar is available on our website at the school board, under the school board tab and calendars. So we do have a couple of other special budget meetings coming up, and that's all available on the website.
Okay. I got notice of this yesterday, this meeting.
Thank you so much for coming.
Huh?
Thank you so much for coming.
Was Tom copied on the stuff this morning? Point.
No, I did not.
I didn't check.
I'm
my-
sorry.
There is a line
I was
item
not
budget that
aware
came out at 1 a.m. this
Of
morning.
anybody who
Oh, I
might be
didn't see
coming.
it. I haven't checked my email this
She
morning.
said it wasn't with, you'll take care of sending that out, right?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't check my email before.
Yeah, and to Carl Pruder as well, right?
He's part of the
Yes,
budget committee?
yes,
Okay.
he's, you're the
Maybe I can just,
representative.
after the meeting, somebody can give me a list of who I should be sending it to on emails, that would be great.
Sure, you know, it's funny, the towns don't often tell us. I don't think I ever saw anything particularly about Mr. Coney, but Carl Pruder did mention that he was gonna be on the advisory committee. Town of Jaffrey never sent anyone, I thought that they would, but they didn't.
I did not get that email. I just checked.
Right.
I'm
Carl-
sorry, I
Carl-
didn't know to send it to you, so
Yeah.
I apologize, I'll get it sent.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like Charlie said, it came out at 1:30 this morning, so. None of us had much of a chance to,
The original timeline was to be next Saturday. Because of a lot of conflicts, we had to speed up the process here to meet today, so there was a lot of work that needed to make that happen. So thank you. But that does bring up another point, however, because we would not have been making a budget decision this early. You know, we would have been making it at the 18th, or I suppose you could even change the board meeting to the 11th or whatever if you wanted to. But I would recommend that we have budget conversations, more budget conversations on Monday, get some direction during that time frame. That way we have some time to, if there are cuts that need to be made and so forth, that we are able to go and do that over the course of a week or two, and be able to come back and finalize that on the 18th.
That'd be great, because right now it says that
Or the
we're
11th.
finalizing the
Yeah.
budget this coming Monday,
That's correct.
with including warrant articles.
Right.
And my face feels like Kim's, yeah, just, that feels soon.
Yeah,
we may need more time.
we would need more time.
I'll have to look at the schedule, because I'm on the budget stuff in range too, so. I
So-
don't know what the conflicts are, so I'll have to look.
No conflicts, Tom.
No conflict?
Wednesday.
Mondays.
Wednesday's the way one is, so.
Well, it's like a meeting, or Wednesday, there's nothing on Wednesday, I'm that you're done.
Well, you bring up a good point, that it's some pretty hefty sticker shock.
Oh, yeah, like I said, I'm
That's a calendar.
Oh,
Print
terrific,
that,
thanks.
I'll have it.
I'm not trying to be negative or
We don't-
positive
we
one
don't
way or
see
the
you
other,
as
I'm
being
gonna look at
negative.
it from my own viewpoint, but I think, you know, from the average citizen, they're gonna vote for the lower number, and, you know, but being on a budget committee in the town, I mean, that's a tough one. But to try to line them up a little bit closer might be a little bit better. And, you know, you have more of a chance, you know, basically you're doubling your operating budget versus from a default, and your default's already, you know, up. So the closer those two numbers come together, the less chance you have of a default budget again. And, you know, Ridge went through that recently and may go through it again, but I think when you have a default budget and you make it work, you know, from a layman's standpoint, from a businessman's standpoint, I would say, well, I made the default budget work, they didn't need any more money. And it's pretty simple. You made it work, and suffer some, and I get that. But you made it work. So when you ask for 2 million more, that same question is gonna come back, well, they made it work before.
Well, part of the problem is that sometimes you make things work by deferring things.
And you pay the price.
What we did here, it was mentioned today, but I wouldn't expect anybody to pick up on it because there was a lot to it. But we had a default budget 2 years ago. We changed, well, not we, the high school, middle school team changed the educational system, going to a block schedule, eliminating 4 positions, was it?
They made a big change.
And so it was a big change, and that option isn't there now. So, yeah, you always make things work, whether they're in the best interest of the community or not, that's something for the voters and the citizens to decide.
I agree with you 100%. It's gonna be in the voters' hands. That's why I just wanted to make that comment that if I was the average guy voting, knew it was gonna cost me, $2 and something more, I'd probably be voting for the lower number to start with. So it's, your investment in your, preschool, your pre-K stuff is, I think that's all good. But, trying to bring those 2 numbers closer together might be a better, the little pieces count. So,
One of the things that influences us in our communities too is that we're both communities, older populations. And so if we don't have incomes anymore, but we're still paying property taxes, it has a big impact. And that's one of the reasons why the state system, while it's beneficial for some, does not particularly help our communities.
but we can't change that at the moment, so we gotta look at what we got right here. The funding situation
You're probably
is gonna
right,
come down the road at some point. It's gonna be ahead,
We could talk to our legislators about not going always knee-jerk.
I can throw darts, but it's not gonna happen before voting time. Probably.
You're probably right.
I have a question just on the process. Being new to this and the different kind of, I'll call them levers that we can consider to make adjustments. As far as that reserve money, I don't know what, it's in here somewhere in one of these sheets, but as far as the 1.1 million or whatever that was reserved at some point over the past few months. Can that be used to offset next year's impact in any way?
Can only
Or
be
when
used-
can we decide that?
We can use it this year for things that we might be using, that we had budgeted for, that we need next year. In other words, we can pre-buy supplies and things of that nature, all right? Which will reduce next year's budget,
Yeah.
but we can't carry that money over.
Right. At what point do we make that decision again? Is it the end of the fiscal year or what we
At
do?
the end, I believe it's in August, it's about August, that will determine what the result is for the current year, in terms of if we have a surplus or not. And then we have to vote in terms of how much that's surplus.
Right.
we're going to carry over.
Okay, so that's not until that August, September timeframe that we can do that.
Yeah, it's
So there's nothing that
primarily
can be done
because that
now. We can
fund-
say we could take. Okay, I understand.
It's,
Well, there's, so I hear a couple different questions, whether you meant to ask it or not. There's the 5% carryover, which is, this year is like the 1.1 million, I think it is, that you have in case, and we call it usually the emergency. In case of a big emergency or whatever like that, you have money.
That's the fund balance and revenues you see in here, there's a deduction.
Yes.
No.
Right, okay, I just want to make sure.
No.
That's not part of this,
No,
no, that's not part of what everybody's given, that's kept track of separately.
But that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
It's like an unassigned balance.
unassigned fund balance.
And what is
So
that number?
currently, the board has access, it should, it would have to have a hearing and all this other kind of thing, but a little over 1 million. 5% of the
Part of it is net assessment.
The net
Budget
assessment.
raised by work.
Yep. And, but the other question I thought I heard in there somewhere.
I was basically just generally asking, besides making, let's suppose that we're gonna make that number lower, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's maybe the objective. Besides making cuts, are there any other, levers, vehicles that we can use to, to lessen the tax impact? I'd just like to understand that. I should know that, but I don't.
In years past, what we've done, I heard in the conversation, purchasing things, pre-purchasing things. You really need to, if you're gonna do that pre-purchase thing, it really needs to be sooner than later. It needs to be kind of a decision, we can even have those conversations like right now and identify those things. And typically things that we can use right now. So technology can be, we can use right now, we can use it this year. Because we're supposed to be spending the money from this year for things for this year, not for next year. But,
Understood.
but we could certainly utilize, materials for next year that we purchased this year, if we can use it this year. So that's important to know kind of a little bit. And then, so like a tractor, for instance.
Yeah.
They could use a tractor now. So if you purchase the tractor now, it comes out, you don't need the budget for next year.
Right.
If, you can get wireless access points or whatever, or right now, at Chromebooks is a tougher one because they seem to be updating those things every 6 months or so, so you get them 6 months early. Yeah, you can utilize them, they end up malfunctioning on us faster. They last and function fine for years, 5 years or so. But for the purpose that we need to use them for education and the state assessments that we're mandated to do, they have just failed on us
Yeah, I
after a
remember.
certain period of time, I don't know why.
So you can't move it into next year.
Well, we cannot, no.
You gotta spend it this year.
Yeah, we can't
You
just,
can't apply it like the town does towards
Yeah.
moving it forward.
yeah, we can't do that.
And what happens if we don't spend it?
We have a decision to make again, I think, and
So it's part of the fund balance, so it'll come as part of the fund balance, so at the end of the year, when we look at our total fund balance, whatever is available, the board can vote to retain up to 5% of that current year's net assessment. Again, and anything above and beyond that would get returned to the taxpayers.
like this year, we gave back money,
$600,000.
$600,000. And we'd have that choice again to make next year that could offset taxes, whether it be $600,000 or, if we
So
didn't
to
want to carry an
utilize
emergency fund, it'd be, close to $2 million. Not that we would necessarily do that, it's just good to understand.
If you do utilize the unassigned fund balance, you have to have a purpose, we have to hold a public hearing.
Understood.
To talk about what the expense is prior to any expenses being incurred. So just
Yep.
for information.
Thanks for staying up so late to get us this information. No, you really, thank you.
Do you need a motion to adjourn? John? Well, it's a regular meeting, right?
Yes, I think we need a motion, a second, and some discussion, see if people want to stay.
I make a motion to adjourn.
A second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah. We're out.
We're out of it, okay.